Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Vision Harry, presenting to you today, what if every phoenix in existence felt Harry's pain at age 5 and Fawkes led them to burn every block Dumbledore placed. Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, The Scream That Crossed Oceans. The thunderstorm that rolled over Little Whinging on the night of July 31st had no meteorological reason to exist. The weather service in London would note it the next morning with mild confusion, a localized, violent storm cell that appeared over a single residential neighborhood in Surrey, dumped 3 inches of rain in 40 minutes, shattered 2 streetlights on Privet Drive specifically, and then vanished as cleanly as if someone had switched it off. They would file it under anomalous local weather events and move on with their lives, because that is what people do when the world briefly shows its teeth and they have no framework for the bite marks. At number 4, Privet Drive, the storm had a different quality altogether. It began just after midnight, when the boy in the cupboard under the stairs turned 5 years old. Harry Potter was small for his age, not naturally, but by design, though he didn't know that yet. He was all knobbly knees and 2 large hand-me-down clothes and a mop of black hair that never lay flat no matter how many times Aunt Petunia yanked a comb through it with obvious frustration. He had a scar on his forehead shaped like a lightning bolt, which Aunt Petunia had told him was from the car accident that had killed his parents, and which he had never quite believed even before he understood why. He had green eyes so bright they sometimes made people uncomfortable, like looking at something that shouldn't exist in an ordinary face. He was sleeping when the storm began. Or he had been sleeping, fitful, cramped sleep in the cupboard where he'd lived his whole remembered life, curled around the hot water pipe that ran along the floor to stay warm, his threadbare blanket doing very little against the damp cold that crept under the cupboard door. He woke when the thunder hit. Not just the sound of it, the feeling of it, a shockwave that rattled his teeth and vibrated in his chest like a struck bell. He sat up fast and knocked his head on the low ceiling, swore under his breath the way he'd heard Dudley do, and pressed his ear against the cupboard door. Rain. Hard rain, hammering the windows like it had a grievance. The house settling and groaning around it. And something else, something under the storm, not a sound exactly, more like the memory of a sound, a high and aching note that Harry could feel in the back of his throat like the aftermath of crying. He didn't know what it was. He rubbed his eyes, pulled his knees up to his chest, and waited for the storm to pass. It didn't pass. It got worse. The temperature in the cupboard climbed sharply, which made no sense because outside the windows the rain was cold and the wind was biting. But inside Harry's small enclosed space the air went thick and warm, warm like a hearth, warm like the memory of something he'd never actually experienced but somehow recognized anyway. He pulled off his blanket and sat in just his too large t-shirt and felt sweat prick along the back of his neck. Then the first crack appeared. He didn't see it so much as feel it, a snap somewhere inside his own chest, like a door latch giving way. Nothing visible. No blood. No pain, actually, which surprised him because it had felt like something breaking. Just that single sharp release, and then a long exhale that he hadn't known he was holding, and then warmth bleeding through him like color filling in a gray drawing. He sat very still with both hands pressed flat on his knees and tried to figure out what had just happened to him. Outside, the storm doubled in intensity. 3,000 miles away, on a coastal cliff in Western Ireland, a flock of 7 free-flying phoenixes went silent mid-song. They had been singing the way phoenixes sing at midnight, not for anyone, not in response to anything, just because they were phoenixes and the night was clear and that was what they did. The eldest of them, a copper-and-gold bird with a wingspan like a small hang glider, had been mid-trill when it happened. The note died in his throat. His head snapped east, toward England, toward Surrey, toward one specific house on one specific street. Every bird on that cliff turned the same direction at the same moment. Then they all opened their mouths and screamed. It was not a sound that belonged to the natural world. Phoenixes are already extraordinary vocalists, their song has been known to heal infections, slow bleeding, shore up crumbling hope in human hearts from half a mile away. But this was nothing like their song. This was a sound of recognition and fury, the sound of creatures built to feel warmth encountering something so cold and deliberate and wrong that it bypassed every instinct except one. The eldest phoenix left the cliff without pause. The other 6 followed. They didn't know where they were going with any navigational precision, they knew the direction the way a compass needle knows north, the way pain knows its own source. They flew east through the rain and the dark and didn't stop. Across a rainforest in Brazil, 3 phoenixes roosting in the high canopy lifted their heads from under their wings, oriented like weather vanes, and launched themselves skyward through the tree cover in a vertical explosion of amber light. In the mountains above Kathmandu, a solitary phoenix that had not been seen by human eyes in 60 years rose from its nest on a ledge at 11,000 feet and turned west toward England without eating, without resting, without hesitation. In the Sahara Desert, in the high Andes, in a bamboo forest in southern China, in the frozen archipelago north of Norway where a breeding pair had lived undisturbed for a century, they all felt it. They all turned. They all moved. The Phoenix Network is not a constructed thing, not a spell or an enchantment. It is simply what phoenixes are, creatures of empathy so profound that they share sensation the way water shares temperature. One phoenix in pain is all phoenixes in pain. One phoenix in joy is a chorus. They do not communicate in words or images, not exactly. They communicate in the language of fire, warmth, cold, presence, absence, the particular quality of light when a living flame is deliberately smothered. What they felt coming from Privet Drive was the last of those. A flame that had been smothered so methodically, so carefully, so recently renewed every time it struggled to breathe, that every phoenix in existence recognized it immediately for what it was. Someone had caged a sun. Albus Dumbledore's office at Hogwarts was dark and quiet when Fawkes screamed. Dumbledore had gone to bed at 11, which was late for him and early by any reasonable academic standard, with the particular satisfaction of a man who has managed his many responsibilities well and expects them to stay managed. He had checked the wards on Privet Drive that afternoon, as he did every month. He had reviewed the maintenance enchantments on the blocks he'd placed around the boy's magic, and found them holding steady. He had written 3 letters, read 2 ministry reports, and eaten half a tin of lemon sherbet that he kept for occasions of mild self-congratulation. He had slept. He was not sleeping when Fawkes screamed. The sound hit the castle like a physical thing. The portraits in the stairwells woke and clutched their painted frames. The enchanted ceiling in the great hall rippled like disturbed water. Professor McGonagall, who had been correcting 4th-year transfiguration essays in her rooms 3 floors down, knocked her inkwell across 3 essays and sat bolt upright with her wand already in her hand before she'd consciously processed what she'd heard. Dumbledore reached his office door in 12 seconds flat, which was impressive for a man of his age and a testament to how alarming the sound had been. He pushed inside and stopped. Fawkes was not on his perch. The perch was undamaged, the office was undamaged, and Fawkes was standing in the center of the circular room on the stone floor with his wings spread to their full and frankly enormous span, his head back and his beak open, and he was singing. Except singing isn't quite the word because it carried no warmth, none of the golden healing quality that Dumbledore had basked in for decades. This was the grief song, the anger song, the particular vocalization that phoenixes produce when they encounter something that offends them at the level of their fundamental nature. It was the most frightening thing Dumbledore had heard in 40 years. "Fawkes," he said, and the word came out softer than he intended, not commanding, something closer to uncertain. "Fawkes, what?" Fawkes swung his head around and looked at him. Dumbledore had been looked at by dark wizards, by monsters, by creatures with no concept of human mercy, and none of it had ever made him step backward involuntarily. Fawkes made him step backward. The Phoenix's eyes held something that Dumbledore had never seen in them in 62 years of their partnership. Not anger, exactly. Anger was something you could negotiate with, reason through, outlast. This was different. This was knowledge. Fawkes knew. Dumbledore's first thought, and he would not be proud of this later, was how. His second thought came on its heels, the boy. "It's for his own protection," he said, which was an extraordinary thing to say unprompted in an empty room to a bird, and which Fawkes answered by spreading his wings wider and letting out a single note so piercing that the window behind Dumbledore's desk cracked along its length in a clean diagonal line. "You don't understand the full scope of what I'm." Fawkes launched himself directly at Dumbledore, and the old man, for the second time in 30 seconds, did something genuinely unprecedented. He flinched. Fawkes wasn't attacking him. He pulled up short, wings beating, hovering at eye level, and fixed Dumbledore with that terrible knowing gaze from a distance of about 8 inches. Then he showed him. It wasn't a vision, exactly. It was sensation, direct, unfiltered, the Phoenix Network transmission turned outward instead of in. Dumbledore felt cold stone under his back. He felt the particular quality of air in a small enclosed space with no windows. He felt hunger not as a concept but as a physical thing, a mean persistent gnawing. And over all of it, under all of it, through all of it, he felt magic pressing against the inside of his own skin and finding every exit sealed, every channel blocked, every natural release valve closed off and relocked again until the pressure was simply constant, simply normal, simply the texture of existing. Dumbledore's hands went to the edge of his desk. "He's safe," he said, and the words tasted different than they always had. Fawkes broke the transmission and was still for one long moment. Then he looked at the window, looked back at Dumbledore, and very deliberately turned his back on the man he had served for over 60 years. The window opened on its own. The rain blew in and soaked Dumbledore's papers. Fawkes flew out into the storm. Dumbledore stood at his desk for a long time in the dark, rain dripping from his papers onto the floor, and thought about the word safe and whether it had always been as hollow as it felt right now. He came to no useful conclusions, which was itself information. Then he pulled out his wand and began working the countercharms to check on the blocks around the boy's magic, because whatever else was happening, the plan was still the plan. The countercharms came back wrong. Something was already inside them. Something had been inside them, working at them from within, with the precise and intimate knowledge of someone who had watched them being built. Dumbledore sat down heavily in his chair and stared at the rain-soaked desk and understood, for the first time, that Fawkes had not been screaming in anger. He'd been screaming in announcement. Harry didn't know any of this. He was 5 years old and alone in a cupboard and his whole body felt like it was running a fever that didn't hurt. The second crack had come about 10 minutes after the first, same sensation, same snap and release, same bloom of warmth following it. Then a third, quicker, like locks turning in rapid succession. Between each one the warmth built further, spreading from his chest into his arms, his fingers, the tips of his ears, the soles of his feet, until he sat in the cramped space crackling with something that was visibly, undeniably, physically present. The light bulb in the cupboard had blown 6 months ago and the Dursleys hadn't replaced it because they saw no reason to provide extra comfort. Harry had been sleeping in the dark for half a year. Right now, the cupboard was lit in soft amber because the warmth was light, emanating from his own skin in a low visible glow that pulsed gently with his heartbeat. He held up his hands and looked at them. Well, he thought. That's new. There was no fear in it. He would examine that later, the absence of fear, and find it significant, because most children discovering they glow in the dark would be at least somewhat alarmed. But Harry had always had a peculiar relationship with his own strangeness. Strange things happened around him. They always had. Hair grew back overnight. He'd ended up on a school roof once. He'd somehow communicated with a boa constrictor at the zoo last spring, which still confused him, but the snake had seemed pleased and Harry had always quietly counted that as a win. This felt different from all of those. Those had been accidents, involuntary, things that happened to him while he was responding to something external. This was internal. This was something that lived inside him behaving as though it had just been let out of a very long imprisonment, stretching, filling available space, figuring out what it could reach. He pressed one glowing palm against the door of the cupboard. The door swung open with absolutely no resistance, the latch moving as if someone on the other side had simply turned the handle. Harry blinked at the dark hallway for a moment, then looked at his hand. The glow was fading slowly, like embers cooling, not going out, just settling. He climbed out of the cupboard and stood up straight in the hallway and took a breath that didn't feel cramped. He was standing there, still in his oversized t-shirt, bare feet on the cold tile, when the kitchen light clicked on. Aunt Petunia stood in the kitchen doorway in her dressing gown with her hair in curlers and an expression of profound irritation that shifted, as she registered the ambient glow still fading from Harry's skin, into something much less comfortable. "What," she said flatly, "is that?" Harry looked at his hands, looked up at her. "I don't know," he said, which was mostly true. You're glowing. It's fading. That is not the point." Her voice went very tight. "Vernon. Vernon." Harry stood in the hallway with his arms at his sides while Vernon Dursley's heavy footsteps came down the stairs and Vernon Dursley's large, mustached, purple-tinged face processed the situation with the particular dull horror of a man confronting something his entire worldview has no category for. "What the hell, he's doing it again," Petunia said, and the again was interesting, Harry noted, because he'd never done anything like this before, which meant again referred to some broader category that Petunia was already aware of and deeply unhappy about. "Stop it," Vernon said, pointing at Harry. "Stop it. Right now." "I don't know how," Harry said, which was also mostly true and also not the answer Vernon was looking for. What happened next was a series of events that Harry would later, from a distance of perspective and genuine amusement, describe as the first time the Dursleys discovered they had miscalculated. Vernon grabbed for his arm, intending presumably to shove him back into the cupboard and shut the door on the problem until morning. His hand closed on Harry's wrist. The glow, which had been fading, spiked. Not violently. Not aggressively. But Vernon's hand hit a wall of warmth so intense that he released Harry immediately and stumbled back 2 steps with a yelp, staring at his reddened palm with an expression of bewildered outrage. Harry looked at his own wrist, then at Vernon, then at the mark on Vernon's palm which was already fading and which had not, in point of fact, done any lasting damage at all. He felt a complicated mix of things he was too young and too underprepared to fully name. Something that was partly fear and partly guilt and partly, lurking at the very bottom, something that was not either of those things. Something that tasted more like finally. "I didn't mean to," he said, "to be fair." Vernon opened his mouth. Outside, the storm redoubled. The windows of number 4 shook in their frames. The lights in the hallway flickered and burst, every bulb simultaneously, and the house fell dark except for Harry's residual glow and the rain-blue light strobing from outside. Then, through the storm, cutting clean across it, a sound. Harry had never heard it before. He had no context for it, no reference point, no framework. It came from outside and above, from somewhere in the dark rain-hammered sky, and it was the most purely alive sound he had ever heard, warm and ancient and enormous, the way he imagined music might sound if music could cry. Every hair on his body rose. The warmth in his chest, which had been settling, suddenly roared back to life. He turned and walked to the front door and opened it before either Dursley could stop him, stepped out onto the front step in his bare feet and his too large shirt in the pouring rain, and looked up. He saw fire in the sky. Not a fire like a burning building or a campfire or any ordinary thing. A fire moving, wheeling in slow deliberate circles above Privet Drive, a deep amber gold that shed no smoke, that the rain ran off rather than quenching, that was not consuming anything because it was not that kind of fire. It was alive. It had eyes. It came down. Fawkes landed on the front garden wall of number 4 with the gravity of something that had decided this specific location mattered and was committing to it accordingly. He was enormous. Harry hadn't known birds could be this size, nearly as tall as Harry himself at the shoulder, his tail feathers brushing the wet concrete, his wings folded in the rain that rolled off his back like water off oiled cloth. He was the color of a fire at its absolute hottest point, red and gold and amber and at the very center something almost white, and his eyes were old in a way that made the house behind Harry feel like it had been built this morning. He looked at Harry. Harry looked back. The rain came down between them. Harry was already soaked, his hair flattened, his shirt plastered to his skinny chest. He should have been cold. He wasn't cold. He was standing in the rain at midnight at the age of 5 in front of a creature that shouldn't exist in any category he knew, and he felt, of all things, recognized. "Hello," he said. Fawkes made a sound. Not the grief song anymore, not the anger song he'd aimed at Dumbledore's office. Something shorter, quieter, with a warmth in it that Harry felt land in his chest like an ember catching. Harry walked down the garden path in his bare feet, rain filling his footprints behind him, and when he reached the garden wall he reached out without thinking and put his hand against Fawkes' neck, below the jaw, the way you might touch something you already know is safe even though you've never met it. The contact was, Harry would later struggle to describe this accurately, and eventually give up and simply say it was like a door opening into a warm room when you've been outside in the cold for so long you'd forgotten what warm felt like. Every remaining block in his magic cracked at once, the last 3 or 4 going simultaneously in a cascade, a chain reaction of releasing that wasn't painful but was certainly dramatic. The burst of light that accompanied it was visible from 3 streets away and caused Mrs. Figg to sit straight up in her bed with a cup of cold tea in her hand and say "oh no" under her breath with the tone of someone who has been half expecting something and is still somehow unprepared. Harry sat down hard on the wet garden path, legs folded under him, one hand still on Fawkes' neck, completely overwhelmed not by pain but by the sheer sudden quantity of himself. His magic was not a trickle finding new channels. It was a flood. It was a river that had been dammed at the source for 5 years suddenly reaching the dam wall and discovering the dam was gone. It moved through him like fever heat, like righteous anger, like the particular quality of first light when the sun crests a horizon after a long night, and it was looking for everything, every sense, every nerve, every magical receptor that had been blocked and starved and sealed and resealed, and filling them with a speed and thoroughness that was frankly a lot for a 5-year-old to process. He leaned his forehead against Fawkes' warm neck and breathed. The storm directly overhead had calmed to ordinary rain. Somewhere down the street, a dog that had been barking fell silent. The temperature around Harry's immediate vicinity had risen about 15 degrees, and the rain that hit the circle of air around him and Fawkes was evaporating before it touched either of them. "You knew about the blocks," Harry said, "against the feathers." He didn't know why he said it. He didn't know about the blocks consciously, not in any analytical sense. But he knew in the way you know about a door that's always been locked that you've walked past your whole life, you know it's there, you know you've never tried to open it, and you know, now that it's open, exactly how long it's been shut. Fawkes made another sound, low and resonant. "Someone put them there," Harry said. He sat back and looked up at Fawkes' ancient face. On purpose. He was 5. His vocabulary for this situation was limited. But the understanding was coming in with everything else, not as information, exactly, but as bone-deep certainty. The blocks hadn't been there because magic worked that way. The blocks had been there because someone built them. Someone with sufficient power and sufficient motivation and sufficient access to his life from the very beginning. He thought of Petunia calling it again. He thought of the word safe without any context for it yet but feeling, instinctively, the conditional nature of it, safe for what? Safe for whom? His hands, resting on his knees, were still faintly warm. Not glowing anymore. Just warm, in the bone, in the blood, in the way magic runs when it has somewhere to go. "Who are you?" he asked Fawkes. The phoenix looked at him steadily. Then he did something Harry would not be able to explain to anyone for a long time. He reached out with one wing and very deliberately touched Harry's scar. Harry didn't flinch. The touch was feather-light and gone in a second. But something moved under it, something that felt wrong in a way distinct from the blocks, a different quality of wrongness, something colder, something that had no fire in it and no warmth and no life but that was nevertheless very much present. Fawkes made a low, warning sound. "Something's in there," Harry said, not panicked. Observational, the way he was about most things that ought to have scared him more than they did. "Isn't there?" Fawkes held his gaze and Harry understood, with the clarity that comes sometimes to children because they haven't yet learned the adult habit of qualifying what they know, that yes, something was in there, and yes, Fawkes knew what it was, and no, it was not going to be a problem that Harry was equipped to deal with tonight at the age of 5 in a garden in the rain. Later, then. All right, Harry said, accepting this with the pragmatic flexibility that had always been his primary survival mechanism. All right. He stood up. He was soaked. The rain had eased to a drizzle. Behind him, in the doorway of number 4, Vernon and Petunia Dursley stood in their dressing gowns watching a 5-year-old have a clearly significant conversation with an enormous magical bird in their front garden, and neither of them could summon language adequate to the situation. Harry turned and looked at them. The thing that was different now, the thing that the absence of the blocks made immediately and viscerally clear, was that Harry could feel the shape of the house from here. He could feel the magic of it, the residual enchantments layered over it, the wardwork that ran along the property boundaries. He could feel the signature of whoever had built those wards, and it matched the signature of whoever had built the blocks, and both of them matched a quality of magic that was authoritative and deliberate and unasked. He looked at his aunt and uncle and he felt, very clearly, that they were afraid of him. They had always been afraid of him. He just hadn't been able to feel it before. "I'll sleep in Dudley's second bedroom tonight," he said. It was not a request. Petunia opened her mouth. Closed it. The cupboard, Harry said, was never appropriate. Silence. Rain. The distant sound of what might have been wings, many wings, far off but getting closer, other phoenixes answering the call, drawn by the network, by the event, by the particular signal that had just fired through every fire-blooded creature in the world. Vernon found his voice. "Now you listen here, Vernon," Petunia said quietly, and there was something in her voice that was not her usual vicious certainty. There was something in it that Harry recognized, not from personal experience but from some deeper instinct, the sound of a person recalibrating. The sound of someone looking at something they have been deliberately not looking at for a very long time and understanding that they cannot look away anymore. Vernon shut up. Harry walked back up the garden path and into the house, trailing warm air and the smell of something that was not rain, something richer, something ancient, something that the house absorbed reluctantly, the way cold stone absorbs heat. He stopped in the hallway and looked back. Fawkes was still on the garden wall, watching. And behind Fawkes, in the storm-dark sky above the street, there were lights. Small at first. Then not small. Amber and gold and red-orange, moving in the clouds, 2 dozen points of light circling in slow deliberate orbits above one specific address in Little Whinging, Surrey. Harry watched them for a moment. Felt their warmth even from this distance, a different flavor from Fawkes but the same root quality, the same ancient fire. He thought about the blocks. About 5 years of existing behind a wall he hadn't known was there. About the signature of the magic that had built it. He thought about the word safe again. Whose safety? What cost? Who decided? He was 5 years old and he had approximately none of the information he needed, and the things he could feel with his newly unblocked magic were giving him the shape of the story even without the details, the way you can see the outline of a city from a distance before you can read any of the street signs. Someone powerful had decided Harry's life for him before he'd been old enough to have opinions. Fawkes was still watching. "I'll find out," Harry said, to himself as much as to the phoenix on the wall. All of it. He went upstairs to Dudley's second bedroom, a room full of broken toys and discarded junk, but with a real bed with a mattress and a frame and everything, and he lay down on top of the cover still slightly damp from the rain, and he stared at the ceiling and let the full tide of his unblocked magic settle around him like a second skin, warm and vast and entirely his own. The lights in the sky above Privet Drive burned through the remainder of the night. In the morning, 17 phoenixes were roosting on the roof of number 4 and 2 were sitting in the oak tree at the end of the garden and one was asleep on the front windowsill and Arabella Figg, peering over her fence with a cup of tea that had gone cold, was going to have a very significant conversation with a certain Hogwarts headmaster that was not, for the first time in their decades of acquaintance, going to go the way he expected. In his office, Dumbledore sat with the broken window not yet repaired, the rain-damp papers still scattered across his desk, and held his wand over the schematic he'd charmed into being, the ward structure around the Potter boy, rendered in light, every connection and block and reinforcement mapped in glowing blue lines. Most of the blue lines were gone. What remained were fragments, the outer shell of the blood ward, which used Petunia's connection to Lily and couldn't be touched without her willing participation, and the thread tied to the boy's scar, which was not Dumbledore's work at all but was considerably more concerning and considerably more central to the plan. Everything else, 5 years of careful, thorough, incrementally renewed magical suppression, was ash. He held his wand very still and looked at the schematic and thought about the options available to him. He was not a man who panicked. He had not survived as long as he had by panicking. He had survived by thinking further ahead than everyone else in the room, by accepting that some costs were necessary, by keeping the largest possible picture in focus even when the details were uncomfortable. The largest picture, right now, was this: Voldemort was not dead. He was diminished, bound to shade and rumor, but not dead. He would return. And when he returned, the boy needed to be ready, not powerful, not dangerous, not difficult to direct, but ready. Ready to walk to his death. Ready to believe it was his choice. Ready to trust the man who had, for his own good, kept him small. A boy who was already powerful, already aware, already questioning, that boy was significantly harder to prepare. He thought about Fawkes. He thought about the lights his detection spells were showing him above Privet Drive, not one phoenix but dozens, an unprecedented gathering, a statement in fire. He thought about the fact that Fawkes had looked at him and he had stepped backward. He began to compose, in his head, the speech he would give Harry Potter when they eventually met. He was very good at speeches. He had never yet met a person he couldn't eventually bring around with the right combination of honesty, warmth, and carefully selected truth. He revised it several times before morning. He would need it to be very good indeed. On the roof of number 4, Privet Drive, 17 phoenixes sat in a ring and sang the dawn in together, their combined voices filling the whole quiet suburb with something that was simultaneously music and fire and memory and a warning in a language older than English, older than magic as humans practiced it, older than the distinction between power and the living soul that carries it. 2 streets over, a child who had grown up being told his strangeness was shameful turned 5 years old in a real bed and listened to the sound above him and knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever came next, whatever questions needed asking, whatever walls needed burning, whatever story someone else had planned for his life, he was not going to face it corked and damned and deliberately kept small. He was going to face it as himself. Whatever that was. However large. He could feel it already, filling him from the inside, the true and unimpeded shape of Harry Potter, 5 years old and already too much, and entirely, permanently, unapologetically enough. Outside, the phoenixes sang. The sun came up over Surrey like it had been doing it all his life and had only been waiting to be noticed. Chapter 2, Fire has no master. The morning after the storm, Privet Drive looked like itself and nothing like itself. The houses were the same. The hedges were the same, neat and judgmental in the early light. The cars sat in their driveways at the same proud angles. Mrs. Number 7 was walking her corgi at the same time she always did, except that today she stopped dead at the corner and stared at the roof of number 4 with an expression suggesting her entire understanding of the natural world was quietly filing for divorce. 17 phoenixes. On one roof. Arranged with a geometric precision that, if you had any framework for reading phoenix behavior at all, was clearly intentional, not roosting randomly but positioned, watchful, oriented outward like sentries who had elected themselves to the post and weren't taking applications for the role. The 2 in the oak tree at the end of the garden were preening with complete indifference to the chaos their presence was causing. The one on the windowsill had its eyes half closed and its tail feathers draped over the sill edge in a waterfall of gold and red that caught the early light and scattered it across the sitting room carpet like stained glass. Arabella Figg had been on her side of the fence since 5:30 in the morning. She was on her 4th cup of tea and had graduated past shock into a cold, focused anger that she was carefully organizing into a list of things she was going to say to Albus Dumbledore that she had never previously allowed herself to say because she believed, genuinely, that he knew better. She was reconsidering that belief. The squib who had lived 2 streets from the Potter boy for 5 years, who had reported faithfully, who had watched him thin and quiet and too careful, who had told herself the headmaster's assurances about protection and necessity meant something, watched the phoenixes sing the dawn in and felt the architectural difference between trusting someone's judgment and trusting someone's goodness, and understood that she had confused the two for a very long time. She set down her 4th cup of tea and went inside to use the fire. Inside number 4, Harry was awake before 6. He'd slept better in Dudley's 2nd bedroom in 4 hours than he could remember sleeping in his life, which was either a commentary on the bed or on the fact that something fundamental had changed in the architecture of his own body overnight. Probably both. He lay still for a moment with his eyes on the ceiling and did what he'd been doing since approximately 3 in the morning when he'd stopped being overwhelmed and started being curious. He felt around the edges of himself. It was the only way he could describe it. His magic didn't feel like a separate thing, it felt like the rest of him, like his arms or his heartbeat, just a dimension of existing that had been absent until last night and was now so obviously, naturally present that its absence seemed retrospectively insane. He could feel the house around him. Not every detail, he wasn't reading minds or sensing specific objects. More like temperature, like pressure. The wards on the property were visible to his magical sense the way walls are visible to your eyes, structural, purposeful, someone else's architecture imposed on space that Harry occupied. He didn't like the feeling of someone else's architecture. He got up, found a slightly less enormous t-shirt in Dudley's discard pile, and went downstairs. The kitchen was empty. He made himself toast, 2 pieces, which was more than his usual ration and which he made with the simple directness of someone who has quietly decided that the particular rules governing his food intake are no longer in operation. The magic didn't surge or spike when he did it. It was just there, steady and warm, backing up the decision the way a second person standing beside you backs up your presence in a room. He ate at the kitchen table rather than standing over the sink. He was halfway through the 2nd piece of toast when he felt it, a presence on the other side of the kitchen window, large and warm and ancient. He looked up. Fawkes was on the outside windowsill, watching him eat with an expression that, on a bird, managed to communicate something very specific: you should eat more than that. I know, Harry said. Fawkes made a low sound that was not quite agreement and not quite argument but somewhere in the register of we will address this. Who put the blocks on me? Harry asked. Direct, no preamble. He'd been sitting with the question since approximately 30 seconds after he'd woken up and had decided there was no useful reason to circle around it. He was 5, not an idiot. Fawkes looked at him. Then he did the thing again, not quite a vision, not quite a transfer of information, but something that arrived in Harry's chest rather than his head. A feeling impression that carried shape without words, something old, something powerful, something that cared, and there was the twist of it, the thing Harry felt most clearly, something that cared about him in a way that was real but contingent. Not unconditional. Conditional on Harry being a specific shape, a specific size, a specific usefulness. It landed in Harry's stomach with the particular weight of a truth you've known somewhere under your skin without the language for it. He knew my parents, Harry said. Another impression, confirming. And he put blocks on me anyway. Confirming. Harry ate the rest of his toast. He thought about it for a while in the way he thought about most hard things, not by trying to process it emotionally, because he didn't quite have the emotional vocabulary for it yet, but by sitting with it until the shape of it became familiar enough that he could carry it without it knocking him over. He would get angrier about it later, when he had more information. For now he just let it be a fact. Someone powerful and deliberate had capped his magic for reasons that served that person, not Harry. I need to know everything, he said to Fawkes. Not now. But eventually. All of it. Fawkes tilted his head and produced a short, warm note that Harry had already started to translate, roughly, as yes, obviously, I am ahead of you. Right, Harry said, and almost smiled. He washed his plate, because he had always washed his own things, that habit wasn't going away, and went to the back garden. The morning was clean after the rain, the grass wet and sharp-smelling, the sky that particular clear blue that only appears in Britain about 12 times a year. He stood on the back step in his bare feet and felt the garden with his magic and marveled, privately, at how much the world had texture that he hadn't been able to feel before. The wards around the property hummed like a low current. The residual phoenix fire from last night had soaked into the garden soil and was warming it from below like banked coals. The oak tree at the back had a concentration of something old and ambient that was probably just the tree being ancient and alive but felt, to Harry's newly opened senses, like a personality. Fawkes came around the side of the house and landed on the garden wall with the kind of casual authority that made it clear this was not a temporary visit. This was a relocation. The phoenixes on the roof were still there. Harry counted them from the garden, 16, plus Fawkes, plus the 2 in the oak tree. He looked up at the roof occupants and felt each of them in the same way he could feel Fawkes, warm, present, distinct. Each one had a slightly different quality of fire, a different temperature, a different age. The oldest ones, the ones whose fire burned at a lower, deeper register, had a gravity to their presence that made Harry's chest feel simultaneously full and accountable. "Why are they all here?" he asked. Fawkes answered with an impression that arrived as image feeling, not words, a web of light, strands connecting every phoenix, and one strand running to Harry, and the whole web having vibrated like a plucked string the night before, not a directed signal but an involuntary broadcast, pain and suppression transmitted through every connected node simultaneously. "You all felt it," Harry said. "The blocks. Confirming warmth. Every phoenix in the world felt 5 years of that." The impression that came back was careful and precise and carried a quality Harry would eventually name as fury held in check by choice, not by inability. Not angry at Harry. Angry for him. The distinction was significant and he felt it clearly. He sat on the back step and thought about that for a while, that creatures he'd never met, distributed across a world he'd never seen, had felt him suffering through a magical network he hadn't known existed, and had come. Not because anyone asked them to. Not because of prophecy or destiny or any of the apparatus of obligation that, he was beginning to dimly perceive, had been arranged around his life like furniture he'd never chosen. Because they felt it and decided it was intolerable. Something about that was more profoundly comforting than anything else that had happened in the last 8 hours. Vernon Dursley appeared at the back door at 8 o'clock with the expression of a man who has spent several hours rehearsing what he was going to say and has now, confronted with the actual moment, forgotten all of it. He was in his work clothes. He had to leave for work in 20 minutes. He needed this situation resolved by then, or at least contained, at least managed, at least reduced to the level of problem that could be ignored through the standard mechanism of aggressive normalcy. He looked at the back garden. He looked at the enormous gold and red bird on the back wall. He looked at his nephew sitting on the step in the early morning like he owned it, barefoot, with a composure that Vernon found deeply and irrationally offensive. "Right," Vernon said. Harry looked up. "Last night was," Vernon started, then stopped. "That is to say, there are rules in this house, 17 phoenixes on the roof," Harry said. 2 in the oak tree. "And Fawkes here." He nodded at the garden wall. Vernon looked at the phoenixes on the roof. One of them looked back with an orange eye the size of a small saucer. Vernon looked away first. "Regardless," Vernon said, "you cannot simply, 'I'll need my own bedroom,'" Harry said. He wasn't being aggressive about it. He was being factual, in the way he was about the toast, in the way he was about the plate. "Dudley has 2. He'll keep the bigger one. I'll use the other." "You'll use the cupboard." Fawkes turned his head and looked at Vernon. That was all. He simply turned his head and looked at Vernon Dursley with an expression that required no translation in any language, and Vernon Dursley felt, in the core of his considerable chest, the sensation of being measured and found to be a very small thing making a very small argument in the presence of something that had existed long before his entire civilization and would exist long after. He did not finish his sentence. "The room," Harry said, "is already mine. I slept in it last night. My things are going in it today." He paused. "You won't touch them." Another pause. "And you won't touch me. Not any of you." He said it without anger, without threat in the theatrical sense. It was simply information, stated with the calm certainty of someone who has recently discovered that they are backed by 19 phoenixes and a magical capacity that singed Vernon's palm on contact. "I'm not saying this to be difficult. I'm saying it because it's how things are now." Vernon's mouth worked. No sound came out. This was remarkable, because Vernon Dursley had a mouth designed at birth for the production of volume. "You should go to work," Harry said. Vernon went to work. Harry watched him back the car down the drive with the mechanical movements of a man operating on autopilot, and felt, not triumph, not anything harsh, something more complicated and quieter. He'd spent 5 years learning to be invisible. It turned out he'd been very good at it, which meant he'd spent 5 years being good at the wrong thing. He was done being good at the wrong thing. Arabella Figg's fire flared green at 8:45 and she stepped through into Dumbledore's office with flour on her apron and a look on her face that made Dumbledore's first carefully prepared sentence die before it reached his mouth. "Don't," she said. He closed his mouth. 17 phoenixes, Albus." She pulled the apron off and dropped it on his desk. 17. On one residential roof in a Muggle street. Do you have any idea what the Ministry's accidental magic reversal squad is going to make of that? "Arabella, I've been watching that boy for 5 years, she said, and her voice had the precise controlled quality of someone who is being careful not to shout because shouting would be a release and she doesn't want release right now, she wants clarity. 5 years. I have told you, that something was wrong. That he was too quiet. That he didn't seem right. And every time you told me it was fine, the protections were necessary, the situation was managed." She stopped. "And last night every phoenix in Britain, and apparently considerably further than Britain, descended on Privet Drive because of what was done to that child. What was done to him was for his, if you say protection," she said, "I will say something to you that I have been not saying for 30 years and you will not enjoy it." Dumbledore was quiet. "He's 5 years old," she said. "He has a real bed as of last night. Would you like to tell me how a child lived in a cupboard for 4 years in a house you personally placed him in?" The silence in the office had a particular quality. Fawkes' empty perch caught the morning light and said nothing useful. "The situation is more complex than," Dumbledore began. "Yes," Figg said. "I imagine it is. And I imagine part of that complexity is that a 5-year-old boy who should have had the magical capacity of a minor natural disaster has been walking around Surrey looking like any ordinary underfed child, and last night someone or something decided to stop that, and now we have 19 phoenixes using a residential property as a communal roosting site and a boy who, based on what I felt through my windows at midnight, is considerably more powerful than your reports have ever indicated." She stopped and looked at him with the directness of someone who has run out of deference. "What exactly do you plan to do about it, Albus?" What Dumbledore planned to do about it was, in fact, a layered and careful plan that he had been refining since approximately 3 in the morning. It involved a visit to Privet Drive, a carefully calibrated first meeting with Harry Potter, and a re-establishment of the narrative he had been constructing for a decade, the boy who survived, who was special but humble, who would trust the right people and walk the right path because he had been shaped, carefully, to do exactly that. What Dumbledore said was, "I'll visit the boy." "He knows," Figg said. Dumbledore went very still. "He knows what, precisely?" "I don't know precisely. But I know what it looks like when a child is figuring something out, and I know what it looks like when a child has already figured something out, and that boy this morning looked like the second one." He's 5 years old, Arabella. Yes, she said. You keep saying that like it's a constraint. She picked up her apron. I'd revise that assumption before you knock on his door. She went back through the fire. Dumbledore sat in his chair and looked at the empty perch for a long time. Then he began revising the speech again. He arrived at Privet Drive at 10 in the morning. He had not operat, that would register with the ministry and generate questions he didn't want to answer right now. He had used one of the lesser-known non-magical transportation options available to those who knew the right pathways, arriving on the corner of Privet Drive looking like a tall, thin, silver-haired man in an ordinary light grey coat, which was as close to Muggle clothing as Dumbledore ever came and which still looked, objectively, like someone had asked a wizard to describe a normal coat without ever having seen one. He stopped at the corner and looked at number 4. The phoenixes on the roof looked back. Dumbledore had seen a phoenix before. He had lived with one for 62 years. He was not, in theory, alarmed by phoenixes. In practice, the sight of 17 of them arranged on a residential roof in the postures of deliberate occupation while 2 more sat in a front garden tree and one, Fawkes, who had left his perch last night and not returned, sat on the front garden wall watching the street with the authority of a landlord doing a property inspection. In practice, Dumbledore found this particular arrangement caused something in his chest that was uncomfortably adjacent to apprehension. He walked up the path anyway. Fawkes watched him come. Fawkes, Dumbledore said, quietly, when he reached the gate. Fawkes looked at him with the same expression as last night, less the grief song. Just the knowledge. The awareness of the full extent of what had been done, and the clear, calm, ancient understanding that it was done now and the relationship that had permitted it was correspondingly different. I would like to speak with the boy, Dumbledore said. The front door opened. Harry Potter stood in the doorway of number 4 in a slightly too large t-shirt and a pair of jeans that were 3 inches too long, his hands in his pockets, his black hair doing its usual impression of a small controlled explosion, and his green eyes bright and direct and absolutely level. He looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore had looked into the eyes of Dark Lords and held the gaze steady. He had stood in front of Grindelwald in the summer of 1945 and not wavered. He was not the sort of man whose composure broke. He was particularly not the sort of man whose composure broke when looking at a 5-year-old. Except that looking at Harry Potter right now was a very specific experience, because Harry Potter was looking back in a way that went slightly beyond what a 5-year-old should be capable of. The eyes were too steady. The stillness was too complete. And the magical aura around him, which had previously registered as nothing, as flat, as a mundane child in a mundane house, was now a thing Dumbledore could feel from the front gate, warm and deep and vast, like standing near a hearth and realizing it is actually a forge. "Hello," Harry said. He glanced at Fawkes. Then back at Dumbledore. "You're Dumbledore." It wasn't a question. Dumbledore arranged his expression into something warm and unthreatening. "I am. And you must be Harry." "I'm very pleased to. Fawkes told me about you," Harry said. Brief silence. "Did he?" Dumbledore said. "Not in words. But I understood it." Harry tilted his head slightly. "The blocks on my magic. You built them. No preamble. No circling. No childhood innocence providing the usual buffer of misdirection." Dumbledore looked at the boy and recalibrated rapidly and extensively. "I did," he said, because lying outright to someone who might be able to feel the lie was inadvisable, and because Dumbledore was skilled enough to know that the best way to keep someone from digging further is often to acknowledge the surface and redirect. "For reasons I would very much like to explain to you." "Come in then," Harry said, and stepped back. He led Dumbledore to the sitting room with the confidence of someone navigating their own house. The sitting room was Petunia's territory, carefully maintained, aggressively normal, full of the particular decorative anxiety of someone trying very hard to look like they've never had anything to do with magic. Harry sat in the armchair without ceremony, leaving Dumbledore the sofa, which should have felt like a child deferring to an adult in terms of the dynamics of the room but somehow felt like nothing of the kind. "Your parents," Dumbledore began. "Were James and Lily Potter," Harry said. "They died fighting Voldemort when I was 1. Voldemort tried to kill me and couldn't. That's my scar." He touched his forehead. "I know most of that. What I don't know is why you put blocks on me." Dumbledore studied him. "May I ask how you know what you know?" "Books, mostly. And logic." Harry looked at him steadily. "Mrs. Fig reads about the wizarding world and sometimes I found the books. Not the detailed ones. But enough." He said it easily, unapologetically. He had been surviving on information scraps for 5 years, reading what he could find, building a picture from fragments. It was the most hairy thing imaginable, and Dumbledore, who had not been given an accurate picture of what the boy was actually like because he'd been given only observation reports filtered through a kind woman's natural inclination toward optimism, felt the strategy he'd been constructing shift slightly under him. "The blocks," Dumbledore said, "were placed because if I had my full power, I'd be harder to manage," Harry said. Not heated. Factual. Like he was reading it off a wall. Dumbledore stopped. "You were going to say it was for my protection," Harry said. "Or something like protection. Because Voldemort would find me and target me if he felt my power. I've been thinking about it since this morning." He paused. "That might even be part of it. But it's not all of it." Dumbledore was looking at the boy and making very rapid adjustments to approximately 14 different plans. The boy was 5. The boy was 5 and had been running on blocked magic and food deprivation and isolation and had arrived, in 8 hours of careful thought, at the framework of Dumbledore's entire strategy regarding him. "You're a remarkable child," Dumbledore said, and it was genuine. "You were going to control me," Harry said. "Weren't you?" It landed in the room like a stone into still water. "Harry, not cruelly," Harry said, and there was something adult in the precision of it, something that had clearly cost him, the acknowledgement that the person who had wronged him had not done it out of simple malice, because simple malice would be easier. "You were going to make me into something useful. Keep me small until it was time for me to be useful. And then point me at Voldemort." Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. There was a very specific art to silence in conversation. Dumbledore had practiced it for decades, the silence that allows the other person to fill the space, to soften their position, to back down from their own certainty. He deployed it now with expert precision. Harry waited him out without blinking. "The situation regarding Voldemort is more complex than, you can explain it to me," Harry said. "You should explain it to me. It's my life. But I want the full version, not the version you think I should have." He stopped. "And the blocks stay off." "Harry, there are very real dangers. The blocks," Harry said again, "stay off." From outside, through the window, the phoenixes on the roof produced a brief and perfectly unified note. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. It was musical and warm and also carried, in its overtones, the unambiguous quality of a large number of ancient and powerful creatures making their position clear without raising their voices. Dumbledore looked at the window. Looked back at Harry. He thought about the speech he'd prepared. He thought about every prepared speech and whether any version of it was going to work on this specific child in this specific moment with this specific backup. He was a man who adapted. The plan had changed. The plan had changed considerably, and he was going to need time and space to figure out what the new plan looked like. What he said was this: "I came here to help you." "I know," Harry said. "I believe that part. I just also believe it was the kind of help that was mostly for you." He looked at Dumbledore with his green eyes and his terrible steadiness. "You can still help me. Actually help me. Tell me what Voldemort is and what the connection is between us and what I'm supposed to do about it, all of it, the whole thing. I'll listen. I'm not stupid and I'm not going to panic." A brief pause, and something younger flickered across his face, not fear, but the genuine uncertainty of a child who is still a child. I'd like to have the information. Dumbledore looked at Harry Potter at 5 years old and thought, the plan cannot survive contact with this child intact. What he said was, I'll tell you what I can. What you can or what you'll choose to. Dumbledore was quiet. All of it, Harry said again, quieter this time but no less certain. Please. The please was what got him, not the strategy, not the analysis, not the remarkable clarity of a 5-year-old dismantling a decades-long scheme in a morning. The please, because it was genuine, because underneath the steadiness there was a child who had slept in a cupboard for 4 years and was asking an adult he had no reason to trust to tell him the truth, and Albus Dumbledore, for all his profound and genuine failures, was not a man without conscience. He did not tell Harry everything. He told him significantly more than he had planned to. He told him about Voldemort, the full shape of it, the Horcruxes, though he did not yet use that word, the fact that Voldemort was not truly dead, the fact of the prophecy. He did not, yet, tell Harry what the prophecy implied about Harry's ultimate role. He told himself this was wisdom. Harry listened to all of it with his hands folded in his lap and his expression attentive, and when Dumbledore finished he was quiet for a moment. There's something in my scar, he said. Dumbledore stopped breathing for precisely 1 second. What makes you say that? Fawkes touched it last night. Harry looked at him. He was warning me. There's something cold in there. Something not mine. Dumbledore looked at his hands. In 60 years he had never fidgeted, and his hands remained still by force of practiced will. Yes, he said. There is. Part of Voldemort. Yes. Harry absorbed this with a calm that was, Dumbledore reflected, either extraordinary emotional maturity or the particular numbness that comes from already having absorbed too many hard truths in too short a window. Possibly both. Can it come out? Harry asked. Potentially. When the time is, can it come out, Harry said again, not aggressively, just getting his actual question answered rather than the version of the answer Dumbledore was inclined to give. Yes, Dumbledore said. In theory, yes. Right, Harry said. We'll work on that. We, Dumbledore noted. Not you. Not please sort that for me. We. As though they were already partners, as though Harry was already managing his own case and had chosen to allow Dumbledore participation under specific conditions. He was 5. Harry, Dumbledore said carefully, there is still a great deal you don't know. The world you're entering, I'll learn it, Harry said simply. When do I go to Hogwarts? When you're 11. 6 years. He nodded, processing. I'll need books. Proper ones, not what I can find in Mrs. Figg's spare room. And I want to correspond with you. Letters. When I have questions I want answers, not when you think it's time to give them. Dumbledore looked at the boy. The boy looked back. Outside, one of the phoenixes on the roof began to sing softly, a sound that drifted in through the window with the morning air. That can be arranged, Dumbledore said carefully. Good. Harry stood, signaling with the complete unconscious authority of someone who has concluded a meeting and is ready to move on with their day. I expect some of the things you told me today aren't things you're used to telling people. They are not. Good, Harry said again, and it wasn't gloating, it was the satisfaction of a person who has had an honest exchange and values that above the comfort of either party. I appreciate it. He showed Dumbledore to the door with the same certainty with which he'd shown him to the sitting room. At the front door, both of them paused. Fawkes was still on the garden wall. As Dumbledore stepped out onto the path, Fawkes watched him leave with the expression of a creature who has concluded a chapter. Dumbledore paused at the gate and turned. Harry. The blocks, the reasons I placed them were not only strategic. Voldemort will be drawn to your power as it grows. There are real dangers, I know, Harry said. He was standing in the doorway, morning light behind him, 19 phoenixes around him like a small army that had elected its general without a vote. And I can handle real dangers. He met Dumbledore's eyes. What I can't handle is more blocks. Don't put any more on me. The last part was not a request. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once, and walked away down Privet Drive in his peculiar grey coat that looked like no Muggle had ever been consulted in its creation. He reached the corner and stopped and stood with his back to the street and thought for a very long time. The plan, as it had stood, was not viable. The boy was not the boy he'd been told he was, which was, he recognized with uncomfortable honesty, because the boy had been kept from being himself until 8 hours ago. He had only observed the blocked version. The real Harry Potter was something else entirely. He would need to know more. He would need to watch. He would need to adapt. And he would need, for the first time in 30 years of managing this situation, to genuinely reconsider whether the management had been the problem all along. He did not come to that conclusion easily. He did not, in fact, come to it this morning. But the first hairline crack in his certainty was there, and Fawkes' empty perch was there, and the sight of a 5-year-old looking at him with more clarity than most adults managed was there, and these things did not go away when he turned the corner and left Privet Drive behind him. Back in the garden, Harry sat with Fawkes in the afternoon light and let the magic run through him, getting familiar with it the way you get familiar with a room in the dark, by feel, by repetition, by learning where all the furniture was. He could do things. He'd tested this carefully and privately throughout the day, not dramatically, not recklessly, but methodically, the way he'd always applied himself to problems in the absence of actual instruction. Small things first. Moving a glass of water across the kitchen counter. Adjusting the temperature in his room. Feeling the wards along the property boundary and learning their individual threads, their connections, the signature woven into their base. That signature. He kept coming back to it. He's going to try to put them back, Harry said to Fawkes. Not accusatorially. Just noting. Fawkes made a sound that Harry translated as, he is considering it. Can you tell? If he tries? A warm pulse of affirmation. Yes. And furthermore, the impression of a network, all the phoenixes presently occupying the roof and tree, all of them already woven into Harry's magical space like a firebreak, like a monitoring system, like a standing refusal. Any attempt to place external suppression on Harry's magic would hit the Phoenix network first, and the Phoenix network had opinions. Harry looked up at the roof. 16 phoenixes looked back. One of the older ones, the large copper and gold bird from the Irish coast, ruffled its feathers in what Harry was already learning to read as something between acknowledgement and a nod. Thank you, he said, to all of them. The afternoon light was warm and golden and the garden smelled like wet earth and something deeper and older, phoenix fire soaked into the soil, the residue of a night's worth of gathered warmth. Harry sat cross-legged on the grass with his back against the garden wall and let the magic settle into its new rhythms and thought about the next 6 years. He was going to learn everything he could. He was going to walk into Hogwarts at 11 with a foundation that no one had prepared for him, that no one had shaped for any particular end. He was going to read and practice and ask questions and refuse every answer that was a managed half-truth, and he was going to figure out the thing in his scar, and he was going to deal with Voldemort in the way that he chose to deal with Voldemort, which was not going to be the way that had been planned for him. He was going to be, he searched for the word and found it in the simplest possible form, himself. Fawkes leaned over and placed the tip of one warm wing between Harry's shoulder blades briefly, the lightest possible contact, the weight of it landing with outsized significance. Harry closed his eyes and lifted his face to the sun and felt his magic move through him like breathing, like the most natural thing in the world, like something that had always been his and was, finally, undeniably, entirely his again. The phoenixes on the roof sang the afternoon through. The sound carried 3 streets in every direction and caused 7 Muggle residents of Little Whinging to stop whatever they were doing and stand still with their faces tilted upward, not knowing why, feeling only that something in the sound reached past the ordinary surface of the day and touched something older and brighter underneath. They would forget it by evening. The way people do. Harry wouldn't. Chapter 3, The boy who burned back 6 years is a long time to prepare for something. It is especially long when you are 5 and everything is new and the world has just cracked itself open to reveal a depth you had no idea was there. It is especially productive when you have 19 phoenixes as a permanent residential fixture, access to a woman 2 streets over who has been quietly hoarding wizarding literature for a decade, and a correspondence with the most powerful wizard alive, that is, by mutual unspoken agreement, the most honest either of them has managed with another person in years. Harry read everything. He read the way starving people eat, not gracefully, not decoratively, but with focused and absolute intent, taking in everything and sorting it and building a structure from it that was entirely his own. Fig gave him her books and then ordered more. Dumbledore sent texts, dry, thorough, occasionally annotated in spidery handwriting with observations that suggested the old man was, under everything, a genuinely brilliant teacher when he was not also being a strategist. Harry sent back letters with questions that made Dumbledore sit with his reply for longer than he expected. The magic came naturally and enormously, and Harry worked with it the way he worked with information, systematically, without ego, not trying to impress anyone or demonstrate anything, just learning the actual shape of what he could do. He was not reckless. He was thorough. There is a difference. Fawkes stayed. The other phoenixes cycled, some left, new ones arrived, drawn by the same network resonance that had pulled them to Privet Drive in the first place. At any given time there were between 6 and 12 of them in or around number 4. Petunia had developed a relationship with this situation that could best be described as armed neutrality. Vernon had developed a relationship with it that could best be described as aggressive denial sustained by a concentrated effort to simply not look directly at anything unusual, which was impressive given that phoenixes are extremely visible. Dudley had, unexpectedly, become fascinated. He and Harry were not friends, the architecture of their relationship had too much history for that, but there was a cautious renegotiation in progress. Dudley had stopped hitting Harry the morning after he'd watched his father's hand come off Harry's wrist red, and Vernon had gone to work without finishing his sentence. He had started asking, in roundabout ways that preserved his dignity, what various magical things were and how they worked. Harry answered honestly and without cruelty, because cruelty was not in him and because Dudley's ignorance was not Dudley's fault. The summers passed. Harry turned 6, then 7, then 8. By 9 he had read every introductory wizarding text available and half of the intermediate ones. By 10 he had developed a regular practice that was not quite what the wizarding world would recognize as formal training, more intuitive, more physical, more connected to the phoenix fire in the garden soil than any wand-based curriculum would have been. By 11, Harry Potter was ready for Hogwarts in the way that a lit match is ready for a room that has been filling with gas for a decade. He was also, having grown into himself without the compressive weight of the blocks, significantly larger than he would otherwise have been, still lean, still fast, but no longer the underfed scrawn of his early childhood. He had his mother's eyes and his father's jaw and something in between, a face that was striking without being conventionally handsome, with the particular quality of someone who is used to looking at things without flinching. Fawkes came to King's Cross. This created a situation. Phoenixes are not invisible. They are extremely, dramatically, impossibly not invisible. Fawkes landing on the trolley with Harry's trunk drew reactions ranging from the Muggle platform's complete bewilderment to the wizarding platform's collective intake of breath. Harry walked through the barrier to platform 9 3/4 and pushed his trolley through the crowd of first-year children and their families, Fawkes riding the trunk like a figurehead on a ship, and felt the wizarding world encounter Harry Potter for the first time. It was an interesting experience from Harry's end. He could feel the recognition moving through the crowd, not of him personally, not yet, but of Fawkes. Every witch and wizard on that platform knew what a phoenix was and had a feeling about what it meant when one chose to accompany a person, and the feeling was approximately the same across the board: this person matters in a way that exceeds ordinary categories. Then someone recognized the scar. It started near the train and moved like fire through dry grass, heads turning, whispers, then the whispers getting louder, then the specific sound of his name said by strangers in a way that Harry had been preparing himself for, intellectually, for 3 years, and which was still, in the event, a genuinely strange experience. He found a compartment, loaded his trunk, and sat by the window with Fawkes on the seat beside him. The platform slid away and the outskirts of London replaced it, and Harry watched the city give way to countryside and felt the steady warmth of Fawkes beside him and thought, all right. Here we go. The compartment door opened 20 minutes out of London. Everywhere else is full, a boy with red hair and a smudge of something on his nose said. Can I? He stopped. He looked at Fawkes. Is that a, yes, Harry said. Come in. Ron Weasley sat down across from Harry with the open and uncomplicated directness of someone who has 6 older siblings and has therefore never developed the particular shyness of only children. He looked at Fawkes with frank amazement, looked at Harry, looked at Fawkes again. He's enormous, Ron said. He is, Harry agreed. Is he yours? Harry glanced at Fawkes. Fawkes made a sound that was approximately, the question misunderstands the relationship but we'll let it go for now. Something like that, Harry said. I'm Ron. Ron Weasley. Harry Potter. Ron's eyes went to the scar with the same reflex everyone's did, then back up, then he clearly decided something and stuck to it. Heard about you, he said. Everyone has. But if you're actually going to talk about being the boy who lived, I should warn you I've heard enough wizard celebrity stories from my brothers to last forever. Harry looked at him for a moment and then laughed, a genuine, uncomplicated laugh that surprised him slightly by its own completeness. Perfect, he said. We don't have to talk about it at all. Excellent, Ron said, settling back with visible satisfaction. Do you play Quidditch? They were 20 minutes into a conversation about Quidditch, on which Harry had read extensively and Ron had practical opinions that exceeded his formal vocabulary for them, when the compartment door opened again and a girl with bushy brown hair and a slightly anxious expression stepped in. Have either of you seen a toad? Neville Longbottom's lost his, it's been all the way down the train and nobody's. She stopped. She looked at Fawkes. Her eyes went from Fawkes to Harry with a speed that suggested very rapid mental processing. That's a phoenix. Yes, Harry said. You're Phoenix. Harry looked at Fawkes. Fawkes looked at the girl with an expression that was, Harry noted, distinctly warmer than the neutral assessment he gave most new people. His name is Fawkes, Harry said. The girl's eyes actually lit up. Fawkes. Like, the one in all the accounts, the one Dumbledore, she stopped herself. I'm Hermione Granger. I've read about phoenixes. They're in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and there's a whole section in Advanced Magical Creatures, and the bond between a phoenix and a wizard is practically unprecedented in documented cases, which means you're, she stopped again, audibly reining herself in. Sorry. I research things. Don't apologize for it, Harry said. Sit down. We're looking for Neville Longbottom's toad. No toad was located. What was located, over the course of the next 2 hours, was the beginning of something that none of them would have the vocabulary to name for years, but that all of them felt, that specific clique of people finding each other who are going to matter, who are going to form the kind of friendship that survives things. Harry liked Ron immediately and without complication, the way you like someone who is entirely what they appear to be. He liked Hermione in a slightly different and equally uncomplicated way. She was sharp and eager and sometimes breathlessly enthusiastic in ways that made her seem like she was trying to prove something, and Harry recognized the shape of that without having to analyze it because he had done his own version of it for years. Fawkes approved of both of them, which Harry registered without making a point of it but which meant something to him. The train pulled into Hogsmeade Station at dusk, the castle visible across the lake with its lights warm in the autumn dark, and Harry stood in the first boat with Ron and Hermione and looked at Hogwarts for the first time and felt, not awe, exactly, though it was extraordinary. Something more specific. A kind of recognition that he had been working toward this place for 6 years and was finally here, and whatever happened next was going to be on his terms. Fawkes flew ahead. The sorting was not what anyone had prepared for. Not for Harry, not for anyone in the hall. Not for Professor McGonagall, who had composed herself since the train station report that Fawkes had been seen on platform 9 3/4 into professional imperturbability and now stood at the front of the great hall with her list and her expression and waited. Harry's name was fifth on the list alphabetically by first name, and in the time it took to reach P, the hall had been watching the back of the room with the particular focused attention of an audience that knows the main event is coming. The sorting was always interesting. The sorting this year had a phoenix perched on the beam above the head table, watching proceedings with the casual authority of a long-term resident attending a house meeting. Potter, Harry. He walked to the stool without hurrying. He sat. McGonagall placed the hat on his head. Silence. Usually the hat began its deliberation within 10 seconds. Sometimes, for the difficult ones, it took 30. At the 2-minute mark, the hall had gone so quiet that the candle flames above them could be heard guttering. The hat said, inside Harry's head, in the voice of something that had been sorting human beings for 1,000 years, well, I've never had to revise my opening assessment quite this quickly. Harry said nothing, just waited. You are not what I expected. The record said one thing. The reality is, considerable. A pause. Every house would benefit from you. This is not flattery, it's taxonomy. You have Gryffindor's courage. You have Ravenclaw's mind. You have Hufflepuff's loyalty, the real kind, not the performed kind. And you have, interesting, a great deal of what Slytherin valued, except your ambition isn't for power. It's for truth. Harry thought, then you know where I should go. Yes, the hat said. I suppose I do. Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted. The hall's applause was, Harry registered, louder than it had been for anyone else, not because he was the boy who lived, or not only because of that, but because the hat had taken 3 minutes and that specific fact had communicated something to every watching student that couldn't quite be put into words. He sat down next to a boy who introduced himself as Seamus Finnegan with obvious delight. Ron arrived at Gryffindor 4 names later, sliding into the seat across from Harry with the energy of someone whose outcome was never in doubt. Hermione arrived at Gryffindor shortly after and sat beside Harry with the satisfied composure of someone who had predicted this and is allowing herself, quietly, to enjoy being right. 3 minutes, Ron said to Harry under the applause for Hermione. I know, Harry said. The record is about 30 seconds. I know. Ron looked at him with a grin that was already the defining expression of their friendship, open and delighted and not remotely intimidated. What did it say? Private, Harry said. Right, fair enough. Ron reached for the bread that had just appeared on the table with the enthusiasm of someone who has been on a train for 8 hours. Brilliant start. Dumbledore stood at the head table and watched Harry Potter settle into Gryffindor and spoke to no one, kept his face neutral, and processed the evening with the focused internal work of someone updating a complex model. The boy was not what he'd expected. He had told himself this since their meeting 6 years ago and had been revising his expectations continuously ever since, through 6 years of correspondence, and yet the reality of Harry Potter in person, older now, himself, the full unblocked version, was still something that required recalibration. He was not afraid of anyone. This was immediately visible. He walked without the weight of self-consciousness. He sat at the Gryffindor table and talked to his new housemates with the ease of someone who has spent years being comfortable in their own skin. He didn't perform confidence and he didn't seek approval and he didn't look toward the head table with the uncertain searching look of a child who wants to know if an authority figure is pleased. He looked toward the head table once. Directly at Dumbledore. A brief, level look that was acknowledging rather than deferential, and then back to his food. Dumbledore thought about the prophecy. He thought about what was embedded in the boy's scar. He thought about everything that still needed to happen and the fact that the shape of it had changed irrevocably from what he'd planned. He thought about Fawkes, on the beam above him, who had not resumed his perch in Dumbledore's office and showed no signs of considering it. He ate his dinner and thought, and the thoughts were the most genuinely uncertain he'd had in 30 years, and he did not let any of this show because he was Dumbledore and he had never in his life let anyone see how fast he was actually moving. The first week of classes was Harry's favorite week. Not because it was easy, some of it was and some of it wasn't, and Harry's honest assessment of his own preparedness was that his theory was excellent and his formal wand technique needed work. He had 6 years of self-directed magical development, which had given him an intuitive facility that confounded some of the practical exercises but did not translate directly into the specific codified discipline of wand casting. He worked on this with the same methodical focus he applied to everything. But mostly he loved it because of the texture of it, the accumulated magic of centuries in the stones, the moving portraits, the staircases that changed, the common room that felt like it had a personality, the library that was so extensive and so disorganized and so magnificent that Harry stood in it on his first proper visit and felt something that might have been love. Hermione felt the same way about the library. She appeared at his elbow on his second day there with 3 books under each arm and said, "You're doing the analytical reading strategy, aren't you? You've got the same method my father uses. He's not a wizard but he reads the same way," and Harry said yes, and they spent 2 hours in companionable parallel silence before she said, "The Transfiguration homework has 17 applications I want to cross-reference," and Harry said, "I'll show you the cross-reference methodology I developed." And that was the moment their friendship became something durable. Ron appeared at the library table an hour after that, sat down, looked at the books, and said, "I'm only here because the common room is loud," which was not true but which Harry generously accepted. "Have either of you noticed anything strange about the third-floor corridor?" Hermione asked, without looking up. "Besides the sign that says students will be killed if they go there?" Ron said. "Because of the sign," Hermione said. "Someone put something up there. Something that's being guarded. The magical signature through the walls is, a 3-headed dog," Harry said. Both of them looked at him. "I walked past the door Tuesday," he said. "I could feel the containment wards and something large and alive and warm-blooded behind them. 3 distinct signatures, same creature, which means 3 heads." He paused. "Also it barked through the door and it was clearly 3 different barks." Ron stared at him. "You could feel that through the wall. The wards are thick but not opaque." Harry turned a page. "Something valuable under it, something worth triple canine security. Probably something connected to whatever Dumbledore is managing this year." "Do you know what it is?" Hermione asked. "I have a theory. I need more information." He glanced up. "Which means I need what's in this library." Hermione slid 2 books across the table without prompting. Ron picked up a third, looked at it, put it down, then picked it up again and actually opened it. Harry noted this as significant without remarking on it. He met Draco Malfoy on the 3rd day. It was in the corridor outside Charms. Malfoy and his 2 permanent companions, Crabbe and Goyle, who Harry had assessed in about 4 seconds as loyal and large and not significantly invested in independent thought, blocking the path with the performative confidence of someone who has been told since birth that they own every room they enter. Harry assessed this in about 3 seconds and walked toward them without adjusting his pace. "Potter," Malfoy said. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." His voice had the particular quality of someone presenting themselves as a prize. He extended his hand. "Draco Malfoy." Harry looked at the hand. He didn't take it. He'd read the Malfoy family history and had a fairly clear sense of what this particular social gesture was being used to establish, and he had no interest in establishing it. "I know who you are," Harry said. Malfoy's hand stayed out for a beat, then retracted. His expression recalibrated quickly, which suggested some intelligence underneath the performance. "I could help you navigate things here," he said. "Hogwarts has, strata. Knowing the right people makes a difference." "I'm sure it does," Harry said. "You'd want to be careful about the company you keep." A glance passed Harry at Ron. "Some families don't have much to offer." Malfoy, Harry said, in a tone that was not unkind and not heated and carried the specific quality of someone who is about to say something true rather than something tactical. I grew up reading wizarding history, including detailed records of most of the prominent families. I know what your family offered Voldemort and I know what it cost you. I'm not interested in being part of whatever you're rebuilding. He paused. But I don't have anything against you personally if you want to try a different approach. Malfoy had gone slightly pale. Not from fear, from the specific discomfort of having your strategy named out loud before you've implemented it. He looked at Harry with something complicated moving behind his pale eyes. The recalculation of a smart person finding out the terrain is different than the map. The Phoenix is yours, he said. It wasn't a question. He chose me, Harry said. There's a difference. Malfoy looked at him for another moment. Then he stepped aside. Harry walked past him and heard Ron fall into step behind him and heard Malfoy say nothing further, which was itself information. You read the Malfoy family history? Ron said quietly, once they'd turned the corner. I read everything, Harry said. That's going to be brilliant and also slightly frightening, isn't it? Probably both, Harry agreed. Potions was Snape. Harry had prepared for this specifically, because the correspondence with Dumbledore over the years had included carefully understated mentions of the potions professor that Harry had decoded with the same patience he applied to everything. He understood the shape of it. Snape had loved his mother. Snape had complicated, entangled feelings about his father. Harry carried both of their faces. This was going to require active management. He walked into the potions dungeon and took the read of the room within about 30 seconds. The dungeon itself was fascinating, old magic in the walls, centuries of accidental spills and experiments and the ambient residue of 1,000 brewed substances forming a kind of alchemical history in the stones. Snape's desk had the precise organization of someone who uses control of their environment as an emotional management tool. The man himself was standing with his back to them, writing on the board, and the magical signature Harry felt from him was dense. Layered. Something large and old and unresolved underneath a surface of perfect professional control. Harry sat down, opened his notebook, and waited. Snape turned. He spoke. His opening monologue was theatrical, the beauty of softly simmering cauldrons, the delicate power of liquids that bewitched the mind, clearly a set piece that had been delivered many times with the same calibrated intimidation built in. Then he looked directly at Harry. Potter. His voice made the name a thing to be examined. Our new celebrity. A pause. Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Draught of living death, Harry said immediately. One of the most powerful sleeping potions known. Asphodel belongs to the lily family, which combined with wormwood in the language of Victorian-era botanical magic carries the meaning of I deeply regret and grief and bitterness. Though I don't know if the naming was intentional. Silence. Snape's expression did not change. This, Harry noted, required effort. He could feel the effort in the slight alteration of the magical field around the man. Where would you look if I asked you to find me a bezoar? Snape continued, and his voice was slightly different, not softer, but more precise. Stomach of a goat. Antidote to most common poisons. Alexander the Great is alleged to have carried one. There's a debate in the literature about whether they work by magical or purely chemical mechanism. I think the evidence favors magical. A longer silence. What, Snape said, is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? None. Same plant, different names. Also called aconitum. Highly toxic, that's the point you're going to make now. Snape looked at him for a long moment. The dungeon was very quiet. Hermione, 2 seats over, had her hand in her lap in a visible act of self-restraint. It appears, Snape said slowly, that celebrity has come prepared. I had a lot of time to read, Harry said. There was something that might, in very specific light, from a certain angle, have been the beginning of an expression other than contempt on Snape's face. It was brief and gone. He moved on to Neville Longbottom's cauldron with a precision that suggested redirection. Harry made careful notes throughout the class, genuinely interested, and thought, this is going to be more complicated and more worthwhile than most things. Snape was brilliant. Under the cruelty, which was real and Harry wasn't going to pretend otherwise, under the performance and the armor and the decades of unresolved grief and guilt, the man was genuinely brilliant at this specific subject. Harry could work with brilliant. He would need to, because he could already feel that Snape was going to be important in ways that the straightforward read of the situation didn't capture. After class, Hermione caught up with him in the corridor. "How did you know the asphodel and wormwood reference?" she asked. Victorian botanical language of flowers applied to potion naming. It's in a text called Herbological Symbolism and the Potion-Making Tradition. Library, 4th shelf on the right in the restricted section's antechamber. He paused. I had access to the restricted section at Hogwarts by age 8 because Dumbledore gave me clearance. Hermione stopped walking. He gave you clearance. For the restricted section. I asked for it. Hermione stared at him. You asked Dumbledore for restricted section access at age 8. 7, actually. He didn't give it until 8. He made you wait a year. It was a negotiation. Harry kept walking. Come on, there's something in the restricted section about the 3rd floor corridor I want to find before dinner. Flying lesson. The November air was cold and bright, the sky that particular clear slate blue of autumn, the ground smelling of earth and grass. Madame Hooch lined them up on the lawn with their broomsticks and the standard instruction, and Harry stood at his broom and felt the magic of it, the enchantments woven into the wood, the directional intent built into the handle, the particular aerodynamic charm that was less like physical engineering and more like a suggestion to the air. He sat up and the broom came up before he'd finished the word. Neville's rose too fast and threw him sideways and deposited him on the ground with a broken wrist, and Madame Hooch took him to the hospital wing with the concerned efficiency of a woman who has seen this particular injury many times. While she was gone, Draco Malfoy picked up Neville's Remembrall from the grass. Look at this, Malfoy said, turning it over with a studied casualness. I'll put it somewhere high. Let Longbottom fly up to get it if he, put it down, Malfoy. Malfoy looked at Harry. Harry was still standing at his broom, not having mounted yet, his tone not raised at all. Or what, Potter? Harry looked at the Remembrall. Then at Malfoy. The air around him shifted in temperature slightly, not dramatically, not threateningly, just a warmth that was noticeable because the morning was cold. I'm asking you once to put it down. The next step isn't something either of us wants. Malfoy looked at the Remembrall. Looked at Harry. Made the calculation that smart people make when they are honest with themselves about the math, and set the Remembrall on the wall beside him. There, he said, as though this had been his intention, Longbottom can get it when he gets back. Harry nodded. Good. A pause. Malfoy mounted his broom. Then, as if it cost him something but he'd decided to spend it anyway, you're not what I expected. Nobody is, Harry said, if you're actually paying attention. He mounted his broom and lifted off. The flying was, yes, he understood why people loved this. He understood it instantly and completely. The magic in the broom responded to him like an extension of his own field, and the air at 200 feet had a quality that the ground couldn't replicate, a cleanness and clarity that matched something in the way his magic felt when he let it run without directing it. He flew out further than he should have and faster than he'd expected and came back laughing, which was a sound his housemates registered as significant because it was the first completely unguarded sound anyone had heard from him and it changed the read of him, made him younger and more real and less unknowable than the rest of the week had suggested. Ron was watching from the ground with a grin. You're insane, he said when Harry landed. That was insane. You belong on a Quidditch team. Wood was already running toward him from the pitch, Hermione observed. Harry turned. Oliver Wood was indeed approaching at speed with an expression of barely contained ecstasy. Harry accepted this with the philosophical equilibrium of someone who had expected something like this and had already decided how to feel about it. The castle settled into rhythm. October, then November. First Halloween, and the troll, which Harry dealt with before it got fully into the girls' bathroom by the simple application of magic that was significantly in excess of what an 11-year-old was supposed to be producing, knocking it sideways into the wall with a finite incantatum on steroids and looking slightly surprised at his own output. Quirrell, who had been white-faced in the corridor when it fell, grew considerably paler. Snape, who arrived 3 seconds later with his wand drawn, looked at the unconscious troll, looked at Harry, looked at the bathroom door still intact, and said, "Explain." "I used a general dispersal charm," Harry said. "I think I overchanneled it slightly." "Is the troll badly hurt?" Snape looked at the troll again. "No." "Good." Harry turned to check on Hermione, who was fine, who was actually more shaken by Harry's magic than by the troll, which she admitted later in the common room. It was like a pressure change," she said, sitting with her tea in front of the fire. "The whole corridor." "How did you?" "I'm working on calibration," Harry said, which was honest. Ron looked at him thoughtfully over his own tea. "You always know what you're doing, don't you?" It never seems like you're figuring it out." "I'm always figuring it out," Harry said. "I'm just not panicking while I do it." Ron looked at this answer for a moment and then accepted it in the way he accepted most things Harry said, not uncritically, but with the open confidence of someone who has decided the person across from him is worth the faith. "Right," Ron said. "Want to play chess?" They played chess. Hermione read. Fawkes dozed on the windowsill and the fire burned and the common room hummed with first-year life, and Harry sat in it and felt, with a warmth that was distinct from magic but not unrelated, that he had found people. Not a destiny. Not a role. People. The distinction mattered enormously. The night Harry broke the mirror of Eriste almost happened before it happened. He went alone because he'd mapped the route from the third-floor corridor through the trapdoor through the logical sequence of protections, Sprout's devil's snare, Flitwick's winged keys, McGonagall's chess set, Quirrell's troll, which was why Quirrell had looked sick when Harry mentioned the series to Dumbledore in a letter and Dumbledore had not replied to that specific point, and he'd put it together because Snape's suspicious behavior and Quirrell's increasingly odd magical signature and the cold feeling under the cold feeling that Harry associated with the presence in his scar. He went because something was going to happen that night and he could feel it, the way he could feel wards and living signatures through stone walls. He went because it was his fight and he wasn't about to delegate it. He did not go alone. "You're going tonight," Ron said. It was not a question. "I can tell. You've got the look." "What look?" "The one where you've already decided." Ron stood up from the chessboard. "I'm coming." "Ron, Harry." Ron crossed his arms in the way he did when he'd made a final decision and was waiting for the world to catch up. "I'm coming." Hermione appeared from behind her curtain of hair where she'd been pretending to read. "So am I." Harry looked at both of them. He had a brief internal process that he ran quickly, efficiently, with full honesty. He didn't need them. He was capable of doing this alone. He was more capable than any 11-year-old they'd ever put a broomstick in front of, and the thing at the end of this corridor was something he could manage. He also understood, from a foundation he'd been building since age 5, that capability is not the same as the right to bear everything alone. "The chess set is going to be the hardest part," he said. Ron looked briefly electric with purpose. "The chess set is mine." The mirror room. Quirrell's turban on the floor revealing the face on the back of his head. Voldemort's voice, thinner than Harry had expected, stretched and cold, not the commanding presence of the fear name but something desperate and grasping and much more frightening for what that desperation implied than any performance of strength would have been. "Give me the stone," Voldemort said through Quirrell's second mouth. Harry stood in front of the mirror with the stone already in his pocket. It had slipped there through the mirror's reflection the moment he'd stood before it without wanting to use it, which was the protection's logic working exactly as intended. He felt the stone's weight. He felt the cold in his scar. He felt Voldemort's presence in Quirrell with a clarity that was different from how he'd felt it in the scar, separate, external, a soul untethered and clinging to a host the way fire clings to anything it can consume. "You're not as strong as you think you are," Voldemort said. "The boy they've built stories around. The boy who lived. You lived by accident, I lived," Harry said, "because my mother loved me. I know that. I've known it since I was old enough to read about it." He looked at the second face on Quirrell's head with the calm directness that he'd turned on Dumbledore at age 5 and on Vernon Dursley and on Malfoy and on the Troll and on every situation that had put something in front of him and called it an obstacle. "And you've been dying by inches since the same night. A piece of your soul in a scar. The rest of you scattered across objects like broken glass." A pause. "That's not power. That's fear of death arranged into a really ugly problem." Quirrell reached for him. The contact was different from the palm burn in the cupboard when he was 5. This was not accidental. This was intentional. Harry's magic, free and full and 6 years of growth and practice, meeting Voldemort's magic filtered through a borrowed body, and the combination produced something that was not what Quirrell or Voldemort had been expecting. It was warm. Not an attack. Not a curse. Just the presence of Harry's magic in direct contact with a piece of Voldemort's diminished and tattered soul, and the warmth of it was the same quality as Fawkes' warmth, the same root, phoenix fire soaked into 6 years of daily exposure, woven through Harry's own magical field until it was part of his baseline. Voldemort screamed. Quirrell fell. Harry caught Quirrell on the way down and held him because the man was a person who had been used, and whatever his choices, he did not deserve to hit a stone floor unconscious without someone catching him, and Harry lowered him gently and then stood and looked at the spot where Voldemort's presence had been in the room and was no longer. Not dead. He could feel it, the absence was real but not permanent, the soul piece in the scar was untouched, the Horcruxes were still intact. Voldemort was diminished again, driven back, but not ended. "Not tonight," Harry said, to no one, to the empty mirror room. "But we're working on it." He pocketed the stone and went to find Ron and Hermione, who had made it through the chess room, Ron with a bruised shoulder and a tremendous amount of personal satisfaction, Hermione with the Philosopher's Stone problem completely mapped in her head and a pointed observation about the Ministry's testing logic. "You've got it?" Ron said. "In my pocket." Harry handed the stone to Hermione. "Hold this. We're giving it to Dumbledore directly, not through any intermediary, and I want it witnessed." Hermione took it with the careful hands of someone handling something historically significant. She looked at Harry. "Is Voldemort gone for now?" "Not permanently." He started walking. "We need to write some very thorough letters. Dumbledore's office at midnight." The three of them standing before his desk with Ron's arm in a sling and Hermione's hair even more dramatic than usual from the Devil's Snare encounter, and Harry setting the stone on Dumbledore's desk with both hands flat on the surface afterward, looking at the old man with his level green gaze. "He's gone," Harry said. "Temporarily. Quirrell is in the hospital wing. You'll want to deal with the Quirrell problem carefully. He was coerced, I think, before the possession, and the law is going to make a mess of it if you let the Ministry in without framing it first." Dumbledore looked at the stone. Looked at Harry. Looked at Ron and Hermione and then back at Harry. "You went down tonight because I felt it was going to happen tonight and because it was mine to deal with." Harry met his eyes. "I'm not telling you I went to be reckless. I'm telling you I went because I was capable of handling it and because no one else knew the specific combination of what was there." A pause. "I told you I'd work on the thing in my scar. I haven't forgotten." "Harry," Dumbledore said slowly, "the stone should be destroyed." "Yes," Harry said. "I agree. Do it now." Dumbledore picked up the stone and looked at it for a long moment with an expression that was the most human Harry had ever seen on him, something that lived between grief and relief, old and tired and real. He closed his hand around it. "You are," Dumbledore said quietly, "not who I planned for you to be." "I know," Harry said. I'm better. It wasn't arrogance. It was the quiet, clean assessment of someone who has processed this specific truth honestly and arrived at the only accurate conclusion. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment, and in his expression was something Harry had not seen there before, not fondness, which had always been present, and not concern, which had always been present, but something that was, carefully and late and genuinely, respect. Yes, Dumbledore said. You are. Outside the window, the Hogwarts grounds were dark and still. From somewhere above, the tower, the battlements, came the sound of Fawkes singing, warm and clear and entirely without grief, a song that had no anger in it and no warning. Just fire. Just warmth. Just the sound of something ancient and uncaged singing because it was night and the castle was safe and the boy was fine, and that, for this one moment, was enough. Chapter 4, Bold Fires, New Debts. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in Harry's third year, which was already the most complicated year of his life for reasons that had nothing to do with Sirius Black. It came through the official Ministry Owl post, which was how Harry knew it was going to be either an administrative formality or something important disguised as one. He recognized the ministry seal before he'd fully unfolded it, the same cramped officiousness in every loop of the font, the same quality of bureaucratic weight that existed to remind you that the institution producing the document was very serious about itself. He read it twice. Then he set it on the breakfast table between his porridge and his pumpkin juice and looked at Ron. Sirius Black escaped from Azkaban, he said. Ron looked up from his toast. Yeah, the whole castle knows. McGonagall told the prefects last night. No, I mean, Harry turned the letter to face him. The ministry sent me a personal notification. They want me to know he's been classified as an imminent personal threat. They want me to take precautions. He looked at the letter with a calm that Ron had learned, over 2 years, to read accurately, not unconcerned, but processing something that would look like concern in any other person and in Harry looked like focus. Why would the ministry personally notify an 11-year-old, 13-year-old, about an escaped prisoner unless they thought the prisoner was specifically coming for me? They do think that, Hermione said, appearing from nowhere in the way she did when information was being discussed in her vicinity. She sat down and spread jam on toast with the efficiency of someone allocating the minimum necessary time to breakfast. I overheard Professor Flitwick telling Professor Sprout this morning. There's an assumption in the Auror office that Black is coming for you. Something about him being a supporter of you-know-who. Voldemort, Harry said, because he always did. Hermione didn't flinch anymore. She had stopped flinching in second year. Do you actually believe that? Ron asked Harry. That he's coming for you? Harry thought about it. He had been thinking about it, in the way he thought about things he cared about, not constantly, but in the background, a file open and running while the foreground dealt with other things. He'd read the case file on Sirius Black twice in the library, which had more information than it should have, owing to a Daily Prophet archive that had been donated by an alumnus with limited regard for age-appropriate reading. I think the official story has problems, Harry said. What kind of problems? Peter Pettigrew died. Black supposedly killed him. There were 27 civilian casualties from the explosion, but only Pettigrew's finger was found. He picked up his porridge. If you kill someone with an explosion powerful enough to kill 26 other people, you don't usually find one intact finger. Hermione had gone very still. You think he didn't do it? I think the trial record is incomplete. I looked it up last week. Harry ate a spoonful of porridge. Sirius Black never had a trial. Ron put his toast down. No trial, Harry said. They put him in Azkaban the same day they arrested him and no one ever presented evidence in front of the Wizengamot. Peter Pettigrew got a posthumous Order of Merlin, first class, for exposing Black as a Death Eater. The whole case rested on the assumption that Black was guilty and then worked backward from there. He looked at his friends. My dad's best friend. No trial. Silence at the Gryffindor table around them, the ordinary noise of breakfast carrying on obliviously. What are you going to do? Hermione asked, in the tone she used when she had already worked out what Harry was going to do and was asking partly for confirmation and partly to begin marshalling her own response. "I'm going to find out what actually happened," Harry said. "Starting with finding Sirius Black before the Aurors do, or at least at the same time." Ron picked his toast back up. "Right," he said. "How?" "I need Fawkes." Fawkes found Sirius Black in November. This was not as straightforward as it sounds, because Azkaban escapees with the magical training of a former Auror and the desperation of 12 years of wrongful imprisonment are not easy to locate, and because Fawkes was not a tracking owl following a scent trail. He was something more complex, a creature who could navigate toward emotional heat, toward fire in the metaphorical sense, toward the particular quality of a mind burning with something urgent and unresolved. Sirius Black was burning with about 12 years of unresolved everything. He was not hard to find. Harry was in his defense against the dark arts class when Fawkes appeared at the window, which was not unusual. Fawkes appeared at various windows throughout Harry's day with the casual ubiquity of something that does not recognize institutional boundaries as applying to itself. But the quality of his appearance this time was different. He was agitated in the particular way Harry had learned to read as "I have found something and you need to act on it immediately." Lupin noticed. Professor Remus Lupin was, in Harry's assessment after 6 weeks of class, the best defense teacher Hogwarts had ever had, which was not a high bar given the recent history of the position but which was also true independent of that context. He taught the subject with the specificity of someone who had needed it in real life and survived partly by using it well. He was also, Harry had determined by cross-referencing everything he knew about his parents with the way Lupin occasionally looked at him, specifically at his eyes, specifically with a particular expression of something held very carefully in check, someone who had loved James and Lily Potter and was being very deliberate about managing that in a professional context. Harry found this quietly moving rather than uncomfortable. "Mr. Potter," Lupin said, having watched Fawkes at the window for a moment. "You should go." Harry was already closing his book. Outside in the corridor, Fawkes landed on his shoulder and transmitted with the directness of something that has found what it was sent for, a sense of location, cold and remote, and the particular quality of Sirius Black's emotional signal, not the manic criminal of the newspaper photographs, but something exhausted and urgent and devastatingly sane. He went to Dumbledore's office. "He's somewhere on the grounds," Harry said, without preamble. "Or near them." Fawkes tracked him. Dumbledore looked up from his desk with the expression he'd been wearing more frequently in the last 2 years, not the managed serenity of the man who had everything arranged, but the genuine attention of someone navigating a situation that was requiring him to be actually present rather than orchestrated. "Harry, I need you to listen to me before you do anything else," Harry said. He sat down, which was something he did in Dumbledore's office now with a naturalness that reflected how far the dynamic between them had shifted. "Sirius Black didn't get a trial. I've read the case file. The evidence against him is entirely circumstantial and assembled after the fact. The finger is wrong. The whole thing is wrong." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment with an expression Harry couldn't fully read, which was rare. "What do you know about the Fidelius charm?" Harry asked. "A great deal," Dumbledore said carefully. "My parents used it. The secret keeper was supposed to be Sirius Black. That's the whole prosecution theory. Black knew where they were and gave the location to Voldemort." Harry leaned forward. "But if Black was the secret keeper, Voldemort couldn't have gotten there unless Black told him. And if Black told him, why would Black then go to Pettigrew's location and blow up a street in front of 30 muggles? That's either the most incompetent cover-up in history or it didn't happen the way it was recorded." He paused. "Who suggested the secret keeper change?" Dumbledore's hands were very still on his desk. "My parents switched secret keepers at the last minute," Harry said. "It was in the file. The assumption is that Black convinced them to switch to himself and then betrayed them. But the file doesn't record who proposed the switch. And the one person who would know, who would have helped perform the Fidelius, would have been you." A long silence. "The secret keeper," Dumbledore said slowly, "was changed at James' request. To Sirius? Another silence, longer, with something in it that Harry recognized after a moment as genuine uncertainty, Dumbledore not managing his presentation but actually not sure. To Peter Pettigrew, Dumbledore said. At James' specific request, over my objection. The reasoning was that Sirius was too obvious a target and Pettigrew too unremarkable to attract attention. He paused. I was not informed the switch had occurred until after the fact. By which point, Pettigrew sold them out, Harry said. Yes. And Sirius found out and went after him. And Pettigrew faked his death and framed Sirius and disappeared. Harry sat back. Where is Pettigrew now? That, Dumbledore said, with the specific weight of a man disclosing something he has been sitting on for 12 years, is a question I have been unable to answer. He disappeared. He was declared dead. The inquiry was closed. But he didn't die. No, Dumbledore said. I don't believe he did. Harry looked at him steadily. You could have said this at trial. There was no trial, Dumbledore said. I know. There was no trial because no one asked for one. Including you. The words were not accusatory in tone. They were the most uncomfortable thing you can say to someone, factual. You had enough doubt to privately disbelieve Pettigrew's death but not enough to publicly challenge the conviction of a man who had been your side's most loyal, Harry. Dumbledore's voice had something genuine in it. I was wrong. That is a sentence I do not say often and I am saying it to you now with full sincerity. In the chaos of the aftermath, in the grief of what we had lost, I failed to insist on what should have been insisted upon. And that failure cost Sirius Black 12 years. Harry was quiet for a moment. He sat with it, the honest admission, the real weight of it, the fact that Dumbledore could have saved Sirius and didn't. He filed it under the ongoing accounting he kept of Dumbledore's choices, which was not a ledger of grievances but a ledger of facts, because facts are what you work from. All right, Harry said. He's on or near the grounds. I want to go to him first. Before the Aurors. Harry, if he's guilty, I can hold him until the Aurors arrive. If he's innocent, I can keep the Aurors from killing him before we get him a trial. He looked at Dumbledore. Either way, Fawkes comes. They found Sirius Black in the Shrieking Shack. Not the same night, it took 3 days, careful tracking through Fawkes' directional sense and Harry's own magical perception of the grounds, which had grown thorough enough by 3rd year that he could map the castle's magical topography the way you'd map a room in the dark. Sirius had been moving, never staying in one place long enough to settle, burning through the grounds with the erratic energy of someone operating on pure driven intention and very little else. Harry went alone, or as alone as you can be with a phoenix on your shoulder and 2 friends who had been explicitly told to stay in the castle and who would very definitely come looking if he wasn't back in 2 hours. This was a compromise arrangement that had been negotiated with Hermione's characteristic thoroughness and Ron's characteristic directness. If you're not back in 2 hours, I'm coming and I'm bringing the big chess move energy. The Shrieking Shack was cold and dark and smelled like 12 years of desertion. Harry stood in the entrance and felt the magical space of it, old spells, old grief, old nights of something very different from the haunted house reputation. Lupin's history was in these walls. He thought about that briefly and tucked it away. He went up the stairs. Sirius Black was in the corner of the upstairs room with his back to the wall and his wand up, and he looked exactly like the newspaper photographs except real, gaunt, wild-haired, with the particular look of someone whose body has been through something that their mind refuses to fully account for. His eyes were the thing. Harry had seen that shade of grey described. His father had written about it in the one letter Harry had found archived in the Hogwarts library from the year before the Potters died, casual and fond, and 3 sentences about Sirius saying Padfoot's grey eyes go absolutely silver when he laughs, and Harry had noted this fact and retained it and now saw it was true, even in a face that was gaunt and starved and holding 12 years of wrong. Sirius had his wand pointed at Harry's chest. Harry stood still in the doorway with Fawkes on his shoulder and waited. Sirius' eyes went from Harry's face to Fawkes and back to Harry's face, and something moved through them that was fast and sharp and a great deal more complicated than the crazed killer headline. "You have his face," Sirius said. His voice was rough from disuse, but the intelligence behind it was intact and immediate. "But her eyes." A pause. "Harry." "Sirius," Harry said. The wand didn't lower yet. "How did you find me?" "Fawkes. He tracked you." Harry looked at the wand. "You can put that down. I'm not here to hand you over." A silence in which Sirius processed this and found it improbable, and also found himself inclined to believe it for reasons that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with the fact that this boy had Lily's eyes and James' jaw and a phoenix on his shoulder and was standing in the doorway of the shrieking shack with the calm of someone who is entirely unafraid and has specifically come here without violent intent. The wand came down. Harry crossed the room and sat on the floor across from Sirius with his back against the opposite wall, which was a deliberate choice, eye level, not standing over him, not hovering. Fawkes shifted from Harry's shoulder to the floor between them and looked at Sirius with ancient, warm eyes. Sirius looked at Fawkes for a long moment. Then he made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob but lived in the narrow space between them. "Dumbledore's bird. He left Dumbledore's office 3 years ago," Harry said. "He's mine now, sort of. Or we're each other's." He looked at Sirius steadily. "Tell me what happened." Sirius looked at him. Something in his expression asked whether Harry was ready for this, and something in Harry's expression answered without words, and Sirius told him. "All of it. Peter Pettigrew. The secret keeper switch. The night it fell apart. The street, the explosion, the finger, the Aurors arriving to find Sirius laughing in the middle of the crater, not manic laughter, not the villain's triumph, but the specific hysteria of someone who has understood the shape of their own destruction and found the horror of it too enormous for any other response. 12 years in Azkaban. The Dementors, which Harry felt the phantom cold of just from Sirius describing them and which made his magic flare briefly in a way that Sirius noticed with wide eyes. The slow erosion. Clinging to the knowledge that he was innocent not because hope is warm but because innocence was a fact and facts, unlike hope, do not erode. "Pettigrew is still alive," Harry said, when Sirius finished. Sirius went very still. "What?" "I believe you. And the math is wrong on the explosion. If Pettigrew staged his death, he'd have needed to go somewhere. He'd have gone somewhere safe." Harry looked at him. "Do you know who he'd go to? Where he'd hide?" Sirius was staring at him with an expression that was recalibrating everything. "How old are you?" 13. "You," Sirius stopped. "You believe me?" "Just like that." "I read the case file," Harry said. "The logic doesn't hold together. Doesn't mean you're innocent, but it means you haven't been proven guilty, and proven guilty and assumed guilty are not the same thing." He paused. "No trial. That's the thing that isn't defensible." Sirius made the sound again, the not laugh, the grief compressed into a compressed syllable. 12 years, he said, "and you're the first person. Dumbledore told me today that he believes you too," Harry said. "He's believed for a while that Pettigrew didn't die." "He didn't," Harry stopped himself. Reconsidered. "He didn't do enough, when he should have. He knows that." He said it without apology on Dumbledore's behalf, without softening it, because Sirius deserved it unsoftened. "But he'll help now. He'll push for a trial." "Trials don't happen in the ministry of Cornelius Fudge," Sirius said, with the flatness of someone who has had 12 years to assess British bureaucracy from the inside. "Fudge won't want to admit the system put an innocent man away." "No," Harry agreed. "That's why we're not asking Fudge's permission." Sirius looked at him. "We're going to the Wisengamot directly," Harry said. "Under the provision for emergency hearing, which requires only 7 members and can be called without ministry executive approval." I looked it up. He met Sirius' eyes. "You're my godfather." Under wizarding law I can petition for a hearing on behalf of a family member held without trial. It was in the legal texts. Dumbledore cleared me for the restricted section when I was 8. A very long silence. Sirius Black looked at Harry Potter, 13 years old, sitting on the floor of the Shrieking Shack in November, calm and certain, with a phoenix between them and his parents' faces combined in his and a plan he had already built and was presenting as a fait accompli, and the expression on Sirius' face was something that had no clean name, that lived in the territory between grief and joy and the specific relief of a man who has been alone with his truth for 12 years and has just, for the first time, been believed. James would have loved you, Sirius said, quietly. I know, Harry said, because he'd read enough about his father to believe it was true. I'm sorry I never got to meet him. He'd have been bloody insufferable about how brilliant you are. Sirius' voice cracked on the last word and he didn't try to manage it. He was insufferable about everything. It was one of his best qualities. Harry almost smiled. Then actually smiled, because there was no reason not to, because it was true and because Sirius needed it. I've heard that. Fawkes made a soft sound that landed in the cold room like warmth from a hearth. Both of them felt it. The room was still cold and still abandoned and still smelled like the residue of very old pain, but the warmth of Fawkes in it changed the quality of the cold, the way a fire changes the quality of a night, still dark, but different. Can you walk? Harry asked. Yes. Then let's go. I want you in the castle before the Aurors figure out Fawkes let us here. Once you're inside Hogwarts under Dumbledore's protection, they need a ministry order to come in, and Dumbledore can delay that for at least 2 weeks. He stood, offered his hand. Sirius took it and got up, and Harry felt the shakiness in the grip, the physical reality of 12 years of Dementors and minimal food, the body that had survived on will and righteous fury, and adjusted his grip to steady rather than support, because Sirius Black was the kind of person who needed to be treated as capable of walking even when he was barely managing it. One more thing, Harry said, as they started toward the door. Yeah. When you're free, he said when, not if, with the certainty of someone who has already run the numbers. I want you to tell me about my parents. Everything. Not the saint version. The real version. I've read enough that I know they were actual people who made actual mistakes and I want to know who they actually were. Sirius looked at him. The gray eyes, which had been flat with the long cold of Azkaban for most of this conversation, lit with something that was recognizable as the person he'd been before, quick and warm and not quite serious, despite the name. Your mum, he said, as they went down the stairs, once hexed your dad so thoroughly that it took Madame Pomfrey 6 hours and a very uncomfortable conversation to put him right. What had he done? Existed in a way she found irritating. He was in a phase. A pause, and something warmer in the pause than in any word. She was right to hex him, for what it's worth. He needed it. Good, Harry said. The Wisengamot hearing happened 17 days later and it was, depending on who you spoke to afterward, either a vindication of the system or a demonstration of everything wrong with it. Harry stood before the assembled 7 members, an emergency quorum pulled together under Wizarding Family Law Provision 12, Section 4, which gave a recognized magical guardian or family member the right to petition for review of any detention not preceded by formal trial, and made the case. He was 13. He was in his school robes. He had Hermione's research notes in one hand and 6 years of legal reading in his head and the absolute certainty of someone who has the facts on their side and knows it. He made them listen. He didn't argue emotionally. He didn't argue with heat or with the narrative of the wronged godson, because emotion can be dismissed and he had learned, from years of conversations with Dumbledore that were half tutorial and half very honest argument, that the most powerful thing you can do with a truth is strip it to the bare structure and let it stand. He presented the timeline. He presented the Fidelius mechanics. He presented the problem with Pettigrew's finger. He presented the absence of trial records. He presented, and this was the piece that cracked the hearing open, Dumbledore's signed testimony, submitted in writing and delivered by Owl that morning, stating that Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, Order of Merlin, headmaster of Hogwarts, believed from available evidence that Peter Pettigrew had faked his death and framed Sirius Black, and that the conviction of Sirius Black had proceeded on the basis of assumption rather than evidence. The silence after that testimony was read aloud had a specific quality that Harry recognized from years of paying attention to rooms, the silence of a story that has just changed. They did not acquit Sirius immediately. That would have been too clean, too simple, too much like an institution admitting to a comprehensive catastrophic failure in a single session. What they did was order a full review, release Sirius into Dumbledore's custody pending the review, and assign 2 Aurors to the investigation of Pettigrew's last known movements. It was not justice. It was the beginning of the road toward justice, which is not the same thing but is what actual systems produce when they are working at their very best. Sirius walked out of the Ministry building into the November cold with Harry beside him and stopped on the steps and looked up at the grey London sky and breathed. Harry stood beside him and waited. "I'd forgotten," Sirius said, "what outside smells like." "Cold stone and exhaust fumes," Harry said. "Very atmospheric." Sirius laughed. It was a full sound, real, with the warmth in it of someone who has just found out their body still knows how. He looked down at Harry and the expression on his face was something Harry filed carefully, not because he needed to analyze it but because he wanted to keep it, the look of someone who has been given back something they'd stopped believing they'd ever have. "Thank you," Sirius said. "Family," Harry said, simply. Which was accurate and also all-encompassing and which Sirius understood completely because he looked at Harry and nodded once and that was enough. Remus Lupin found out about the hearing through the same channels everyone at Hogwarts found out about things that happened in the wider world, the morning papers, the staff room conversation, and the particular Hogwarts information network that was faster and less accurate than the papers but considerably more detailed. He appeared in Harry's defense class the day after the hearing with composed professional expression intact and held it perfectly until class ended and the other students had left and Harry was still sitting at his desk writing up the practical notes from that morning's Patronus work. "Harry," Lupin said. Harry looked up. "What you did for Sirius," Lupin stopped. "Started again. 12 years. I believed, I convinced myself, another stop." He sat down at the nearest desk, which was something teachers didn't typically do in Harry's experience, and it landed as significant. "I was wrong. I had evidence, not much, but some, that the case had gaps, and I didn't push because I had just lost James and Lily and I was." He looked at Harry with the honesty of someone who has decided they owe a specific person a specific truth. "I was a coward about it." "You were grieving," Harry said. "Both things can be true." "Yes," Harry agreed. "They can." A silence in which Lupin looked at Harry with the expression Harry had noticed before, the look at the eyes, the held in grief, and Harry looked back without pressure, without performance, without asking Lupin to manage his own feelings in any particular direction. "Your mother," Lupin said, "was the most talented witch of her generation. Possibly of several generations." He said it like a fact, which it was. "She was also stubborn, perceptive, frequently infuriating, and absolutely correct approximately 90% of the time. The other 10% she was incorrect and completely unreachable about it, which somehow made her even more formidable." "I've heard she hexed my dad," Harry said. Lupin's expression shifted into something that was clearly a contained and genuine laugh. "Twice. And on the second occasion Sirius and I agreed it was deserved and didn't intervene, which James never entirely forgave us for, though he couldn't argue with our reasoning." "And my dad?" Lupin looked at him. Something in his face made a decision. "Your father was brilliant and reckless and deeply, genuinely kind in ways he worked very hard to hide from anyone he thought might use it against him. He bullied Snape in school, which I will tell you with full acknowledgement that it was wrong, and which he regretted as an adult more than he ever said out loud, and which I regret enabling because I wanted to be included and that is the worst reason to participate in cruelty." He paused. "He loved your mother entirely. He loved Sirius and Peter and me entirely. He would have given anything to be here. The office was very still. Outside the window the grounds were frost-pale and the sky was low and the castle hummed with its centuries-deep magic. "I know," Harry said. "Not as comfort. As real acknowledgement of a real thing." "Tell me more." Lupin told him more. He told him about the marauders, the map, the animagus transformations, the specific quality of the four of them together that was more than the sum of its parts. He told him about Lily Evans arriving at Hogwarts with fire in her and how James Potter had been absolutely outclassed by her for 3 years before he understood that matching fire with fire was not the strategy and tried something different. He told him about the war, the First War, and what it was like to be 20 in a world that was burning at the edges. Harry listened to all of it and asked questions that were specific and honest and betrayed how much reading he'd done. Lupin occasionally paused at a question and said, "How did you know that?" and Harry would indicate the source and Lupin would nod with the expression of a man who had been told about this child's habits but is still adjusting to the reality. "Remus," Harry said, at some point in the middle of a late afternoon that had started as the post-lesson notes and become something else entirely. Lupin looked at him. "I know about the werewolf thing. I've known for most of the year." Lupin went very still. "I see. It doesn't change anything about how I think about you as a teacher or a person." Harry said it directly, in the way he said things that needed to be said directly without the softening that usually accompanies difficult truths and which usually makes them worse. "But I want you to know that I know, because I don't like operating with information I'm deliberately concealing from someone I'm talking to." A long silence. Then, "How long?" "Second week of term. The monthly pattern in your absences, the specific timing of the Boggart lesson, the smell of the wolfsbane potion that I recognized from the reference in most patenti potions." He paused. "Professor Snape makes it for you?" "Yes." "He's known since school?" "Yes." "And he has always disliked the arrangement?" "For understandable reasons, given that my friends nearly," Lupin stopped. "Nearly got him killed in the Shrieking Shack," Harry said. "In 7th year. Your friends, not you." Lupin looked at him with the expression of someone encountering the specific discomfort of having a stranger know your most guarded history. "The library archive," he said. "Some of it. Some of it was logic from other sources." "You are," Lupin said, slowly, "extraordinarily thorough." "I had a lot of time to read," Harry said, which had become his standard answer for this observation over 3 years and had not once failed to be accurate. Lupin almost smiled. "Your mother used to say something similar. In her case it was about research." He looked at Harry with something that was building, slowly, with the particular quality of someone putting pieces together in real time. "You're not planning to tell anyone?" "No. It's not my information to tell." Harry stood, closing his notebook. "But I'd like to keep talking. Like this. If that's all right." Lupin looked at him for a moment. "Yes," he said. "I'd like that too." 3 weeks after the Wisengamot hearing, the Ministry's Aura investigation turned up something unexpected in Yorkshire, a colony of rats in an abandoned property, one of which had a silver paw. Pettigrew was found on a Wednesday in December, hiding in animagus form in a barn outside of Harrogate. The Aurors brought him in. He confessed, not immediately, not easily, not without the specific legal machinery of Veritaserum administered under Wisengamot order, but completely. Every detail of the secret keeper switch. Every detail of the plan to betray the Potters. Every detail of the staged death and the 12 years that followed. Sirius Black was fully acquitted on December 19, 6 days before Christmas. Harry was in the Gryffindor common room when the news came through. Dumbledore's Patronus, a silver phoenix that was new and clearly significant, appearing through the common room fire and speaking in Dumbledore's voice, "The Wisengamot has returned a full acquittal. Sirius Black is a free man." The common room erupted. Ron knocked over a chessboard. Hermione made a sound that was technically not a squeal and they all agreed to let her tell it that way. Neville Longbottom, who had no direct stake but understood the importance, started clapping and kept going until the sound caught and the whole room was clapping, which was the most Neville thing imaginable and also the right response. Harry sat very still in his chair by the fire for a moment, feeling something that was distinct from the relief of a mission completed, something warmer, something more personal, something that was about the specific fact that his godfather was free and would be present in his life going forward. Fawkes, on the arm of his chair, made a sound that was purely warm. Not triumphant. Not announcing anything. Just present, the way warmth is present. Right, Harry said, quietly, to Fawkes. He wrote to Sirius immediately. The letter was short, because things that mattered most usually didn't require many words. Free is good. Come for Christmas if you want. Harry. The reply came by return owl and was equally short, in Sirius Black's handwriting that was still slightly unsteady from 12 years without a pen but was unmistakably itself. Free is extraordinary. I'll be there. Bring your phoenix. Padfoot. Harry folded the letter and put it in his pocket and felt the word there. Sirius would be there, in the world, in the same room, over Christmas, land with a weight that was entirely good. Hermione appeared at his elbow. How do you feel? Good, Harry said. That's it? Good. He looked at the fire. Felt the warmth of Fawkes against his hand. Thought about Sirius in a building that wasn't Azkaban, breathing outside air, having a life going forward. Thought about Lupin in his office with his guard down talking about James Potter's eyes when he laughed. Thought about Ron across the table at dinner, loyal and present and never once in 3 years requiring Harry to be anything other than what he actually was. Really good, he said. Hermione sat beside him. Ron appeared on the other side. Fawkes spread one warm wing slightly, a motion Harry had learned to read as contentment, as the fire settling into its best configuration when everything it needed was proximate. The common room was loud with celebration around them and the fire was warm and the letter was in Harry's pocket and the winter outside was cold and none of that mattered against the specific weight of this particular moment, which was not a battle won or a crisis managed but something smaller and larger than both of those at once. Family, assembled. Present. Intact. For now, enough. In his office, Albus Dumbledore received the acquittal notice and sat with it for a long time. He thought about a young man laughing in a corridor with James Potter. He thought about what 12 years in Azkaban actually meant, laid against what he had and hadn't done in the days after the war ended. He thought about Harry standing before the Wizengamot at 13 with Hermione Granger's research notes and a certainty built on a foundation of information that he had painstakingly assembled for himself, outside any syllabus, outside any plan. He thought about the plan. He thought about what remained of it. The Horcruxes were not destroyed. Voldemort was not finished. The prophecy was still the prophecy. All of that was still true. But something else was also true, something he had been slow to recognize and was now finding inescapable. The boy he had planned to sacrifice at the right moment, carefully prepared, lovingly manipulated, shaped toward a willing death, was not that boy anymore. Had never been that boy. Had been fighting his way out of that shape since the night 5 phoenixes burned the blocks away in a thunderstorm over Surrey. Harry Potter was not going to walk to his death because he'd been taught to believe he had to. Dumbledore thought about whether that changed what the prophecy required. He thought about it for a long time. He thought about the difference between a path that requires sacrifice and a path that assumes it, and whether he had confused those two things in a way that said more about his own failures than about any actual cosmic necessity. He did not resolve this tonight. But the question was there now, open and honest and refusing to be managed back into the comfortable shape it had held for 12 years, and Dumbledore was. This was new, this was the crack in the stone getting wider, not sure anymore that the shape it had held was right. He looked at the empty perch. He thought about Fawkes in the garden of number 4, singing the dawn up with 17 others, warming the soil that a small boy sat in. He thought about what fire is for. Chapter 5, The War That Was Never Necessary. The graveyard smelled like turned earth and old stone and the particular cold of a place that had not been warm in a long time. Harry felt it before he saw it, the wrongness of the Portkeys' destination arriving as a physical sensation, not the usual stomach drop of Portkey travel but something deeper, something that his magic read before his eyes did. Cold. Old. Wrong. The specific quality of a place where something with no warmth in it had been waiting for a very long time. He landed on both feet, which was not how Portkey arrivals typically went for anyone, but Harry had been arriving on both feet since second year when he'd practiced the landing enough times that Hermione had told him to stop where he'd wear through the Quidditch pitch grass. Cedric Diggory landed beside him and stumbled, and Harry caught his arm without thinking. The Triwizard Tournament had been, in Harry's assessment, an administrative disaster dressed up as a tradition. He had not entered. Someone had entered him, which was either an assassination attempt, a test, or a piece of someone's larger plan, 3 categories that were not mutually exclusive. He had treated it accordingly, with the attention it deserved, the effort it required, and the consistent refusal to be either intimidated or distracted from the fact that someone had specifically put his name in the cup for a reason. He had worked out it was Moody, the fake Moody, the polyjuiced version, in February. He'd told Dumbledore in March. Dumbledore had told him, in the measured way of a man who was trying to navigate between keeping Harry informed and not alarming him, that they could not be certain until they knew the endpoint of whatever plan was in motion. The endpoint was a graveyard in Little Hangleton. "Stay behind me," Harry said to Cedric. Cedric, who was 17 and had been trained as a champion and was taller and older and had every reason to argue with this, looked at Harry and at the graveyard materializing around them in the darkness and said, "Right," without argument, because Cedric Diggory had been paying attention for 9 months and understood the difference between seniority and competence. The figure emerged from between the headstones with the bundled, furtive movement of something that was not fully itself, Pettigrew, smaller than he'd been in the newspaper photographs, his silver hand catching what little light there was. He was carrying something. Harry felt it before he saw it clearly, the wrong cold, concentrated. Voldemort's consciousness, compacted into temporary flesh, a Horcrux-sustained fragment of a soul that had torn itself too many times. "Harry Potter," Pettigrew said, and he sounded frightened, which was its own information. "Pettigrew," Harry said. "You're making a mistake. I have no choice. You had choices for 15 years. You made the wrong ones consistently. You can still stop this." Pettigrew's silver hand tightened on the bundle. "He is my master. You serve a man who has never cared whether you lived or died," Harry said, flat and honest. "You sold my parents for protection and you've spent 15 years as a rat to stay safe. When was the last time Voldemort offered you anything except fear?" For a moment, a very brief moment, something moved in Pettigrew's face that was not quite the servile certainty he'd arrived with. Harry saw it and noted it and knew it wasn't enough, not tonight, not with whatever ritual was already in motion. But he filed it anyway. Because Pettigrew was a person who had made catastrophically wrong choices and was also, still, capable of the kind of doubt that lives under wrong choices, and you never knew when that would matter. The moment passed. "Avada Kedavra," Pettigrew said, without preamble, without ceremony, the wand up and the curse out in one motion. Harry moved left, which was a decision rather than an instinct, and the green light went past his right ear and hit a headstone behind him and the headstone cracked clean across its face. He felt the edge of the curse's field, the specific cold of killing magic near missing was something he'd read about and was now verifying was accurate, and processed it and moved again, forward rather than back, which was not the expected response to being shot at. Pettigrew fired again. Harry threw a shield that was not technically in the Hogwarts curriculum but that he developed independently in 5th year by reading curse-breaking texts, a deflective rather than absorptive shield, which meant the second killing curse angled off and hit the ground to his left in a burst of scorched earth rather than dissipating on impact. "Stop," Harry said, moving steadily forward. "Pettigrew. Stop. I can't, you can. You know you can." He was 10 feet away now. "You just have to decide that what you are is worth more than what he promises you." Pettigrew's wand hand shook. The silver hand did not shake, it moved to the bundle with mechanical certainty, and Harry felt the ritual beginning, the intention hardening in the magical space around the cauldron he hadn't fully registered until now, the dark and ancient structure of blood magic activating in the earth. Harry moved faster than Pettigrew expected and faster than most witnesses would later be able to accurately describe, which was partly speed and partly the way his magic moved when he stopped directing it. And let it respond, a binding charm that was not ministry issue, not from any curriculum, built from 4 years of independent development and a lot of reading about Babylonian containment magic, that wrapped Pettigrew's wand arm from elbow to wrist in a crackling band of golden light and held it absolutely still. The ritual didn't complete. Without Pettigrew's wand, without the components delivered in the right sequence, the blood magic sat unfinished in the earth like a door 3/4 open. Pettigrew stood frozen, wand arm immobile, silver hand still on the bundle, and looked at Harry with an expression that was fear and also, and this was the thing, this was what Harry had been watching for, something else. Something that had been under the fear the whole time and had not had room to breathe in 15 years of terrible choices. "You have a chance right now," Harry said, "close now, 6 feet away. Give me the bundle." A silence in the graveyard that had the quality of a held breath. "He'll kill me," Pettigrew said. Almost a whisper. "He might," Harry said. "Or he might not get the chance. But what you're choosing right now is between who you were and who you've been since 1981, and those are not the same person. I know they're not because the person you were before would not have written to my father every week for 3 years of school when he was sick." He held Pettigrew's gaze. "I read the letters. The ones in the archive. You were someone before you were afraid." The silver hand released the bundle. It hit the ground with a soft thud that was somehow enormous. The wrongness of it, the concentrated dark magic in it, registered immediately. Harry felt the presence inside it, compressed and furious and briefly, shockingly, aware. He felt it press against him the way the thing in his scar sometimes pressed, cold and deliberate and utterly without warmth. He picked up the bundle and the cold hit his hands and he held it anyway, because it was not going to hurt him and he knew it, had always known it in the same bone-deep way he knew other things, because his magic ran at a temperature that dark magic could not find purchase on, had not been able to since the night Fawkes burned the blocks away and phoenix fire wove itself into every layer of his magical field. Voldemort's compressed consciousness hit the warmth of Harry's magical field and recoiled. "Hello," Harry said, quietly, to the thing in his hands. "I've been waiting to have this conversation." He felt Cedric behind him, felt the boy's wand up and his breathing controlled, felt the graveyard's old stone and old grief around them. He felt the ritual's incomplete structure beneath them in the earth, still and useless without its final steps. And he felt, coming from somewhere above and impossible to mistake, the warmth of Fawkes. The phoenix arrived in a column of flame that lit the graveyard like a bonfire. Not just Fawkes. That was the thing. Harry had felt Fawkes coming for the last 30 seconds, felt the warmth building in the cold night air, felt the network resonance that meant Fawkes was not alone. But the scale of what arrived was still, even for Harry, something that required a moment. 7 phoenixes. Coming down through the November dark in a formation that no human military had invented and no animal instinct had generated, because this was not instinct and not training but choice, the specific, ancient, fire-warm choice of creatures who had felt a child suffering in a cupboard 9 years ago and decided then, in that elemental moment, that they had an interest in how this story ended. Fawkes landed on Harry's shoulder. The other 6 arranged themselves around the graveyard's perimeter with the calm authority of something that has decided where it stands. The temperature in the graveyard went from cold to warm to hot in approximately 4 seconds. Pettigrew fell to his knees. Not from Harry. From the fire, the ambient light of 7 phoenixes in an enclosed space of old stone was approximately as gentle as a summer noon and approximately as negotiable, and Pettigrew had been living in darkness in one form or another for 15 years and his eyes simply couldn't manage it. Harry felt the thing in his hands recoil harder. Voldemort's consciousness, stripped of his body, sustained by the Horcruxes but unable to fully act without completing the ritual, pressed against the containment of the bundle's makeshift flesh prison with a fury that was more frightening than a scream, because it was controlled, because even diminished and trapped and burning in the proximity of phoenix fire, Voldemort was not panicking. He was calculating. "You know what I am," the voice came, thin, high, terrible, not from the bundle but from the air, the quality of a mind that could project intention without a mouth. "You know what I've survived. You cannot kill me. Not like this. Not with fire and sentiment." "I know about the Horcruxes," Harry said. A silence. "All of them," Harry said. "Every object and where it is. I've been working on it for 2 years. "Impossible," the voice said. "That information doesn't exist anywhere. I should have been able to find it, yes. Except that the magic that was used to make them leaves a specific kind of residue in the ambient magical field, and if you know what you're feeling for, you can find it. I can feel them from here." He could. He could feel all of them, the locket, the cup, the diadem, the ring, the diary that was already destroyed, the snake somewhere in England, and the one in his own scar, cold and specific and hated. 7 pieces. 7 hiding places. You tore yourself apart and distributed the pieces and thought that made you untouchable. "It makes me immortal. It makes you incomplete," Harry said. Not harshly. The way he said true things, plainly, without pleasure in the truth. "You're not alive, you're not dead, you're not anything. You've been a shade for 14 years. A whisper. A rumor." He looked at the bundle in his hands. "Is this what you wanted when you started?" The silence that followed was the most interesting silence Harry had ever been part of. Because the answer that would have come easily from the monster of the newspaper accounts, "Yes, power at any cost, I am beyond such questions," didn't come. The silence was not a performer's pause. It was something actually considering something. "Give me a body," the voice said finally. "Finish the ritual. Let me exist as I should, and I will." "No," Harry said. "You cannot hold me here indefinitely." "No," Harry agreed. "Which is why I'm ending this tonight." He looked at the bundle and felt the thing inside it and felt his own scar and felt the phoenix fire running through him and thought about what he'd been preparing for 2 years, what Dumbledore had finally, completely, honestly helped him build in the last 8 months when Harry had sat down with the old man and said, "Tell me everything about Horcruxes, now, all of it, no more waiting for the right moment." "Not you. Not yet. But what you're trying to do tonight." He turned to Cedric. "I need you to take Pettigrew back through the portkey. He needs to be in ministry custody immediately. He shouldn't be present for what happens next." Cedric looked at him. "What happens next?" "I destroy the container," Harry said. "Which ends his ability to complete the ritual or regenerate a body through this method. He goes back to being a shade. And then we deal with the Horcruxes. All of them. All of them. One at a time. It was always going to be this." He looked at Cedric steadily. "You should go. This is," he stopped. "Started again. What I'm about to do is going to produce a lot of fire. You'll be safer outside the radius." "I've been a champion for a year," Cedric said, with the specific dignity of someone who has earned a thing and intends to be acknowledged for it. "I can stand in fire." "Not this kind," Harry said. A pause. Cedric looked at Fawkes on Harry's shoulder. Looked at the 6 phoenixes arranged around them in their perimeter of ancient light. Looked at Harry with the clear-eyed assessment of a Hufflepuff who has decided what loyalty requires. "All right," Cedric said. "But Harry, I'll see you back at the castle." Cedric took Pettigrew's arm. Pettigrew didn't resist, seemed in fact barely capable of independent locomotion, the silver hand hanging inert and the binding charm still on his wand arm, touched the portkey cup, and vanished. Harry stood alone in the graveyard with 7 phoenixes and the most fragmented Dark Lord in recorded magical history and thought, right. The fire came from him, not from the phoenixes. That was the thing people would try to understand later and mostly fail to, because human magic doesn't work that way. It comes from the wand, it flows through training, it follows rules and structures and the learned pathways of years of study. What Harry produced was not any of those things. It was the 9 years of Phoenix fire in his magical field responding to his intention with the full, unimpeded, unblocked weight of a power that had been damned for 5 years and growing freely for 9, and it looked like fire because fire is what that kind of magic looks like when it has no other form to take. The bundle combusted in his hands. Not explosively. Not the killing light of the Avada or the explosive violence of some other curse. Just, warmth, increasing, until the wrongness in it couldn't hold its shape anymore, the way a knot of ice can't maintain itself against a river in spring. The consciousness in it screamed, and the 6 phoenixes around the perimeter answered with a single sustained note that was the warmth equivalent of a door closing, and the scream cut off. The bundle was ash in Harry's hands. He felt the thing in his scar jolt. Felt it pull back into itself, contract, the way it did when its source was disrupted. When another piece of the soul was destroyed, the remaining pieces felt it. He'd verified this with the diary's destruction 2 years ago. The scar burned briefly and he accepted the burning and it passed. He stood in the graveyard, ash in his hands, and thought, 2 down. 5 to go. Then he sat down on the cold ground because his legs decided that was a reasonable outcome of the last 10 minutes, and he sat there in the graveyard among the phoenixes and looked at the ash and thought about Voldemort, about what the man had been before he was the monster, about the specific quality of that silence when Harry had asked, "Is this what you wanted?" About whether there was a conversation to be had there or only damage to be contained. He didn't know yet. He thought maybe no one did. He thought maybe it was a question that would have to be answered by whatever happened when all the Horcruxes were gone and there was nothing left but the real thing, diminished and naked and actual. He thought about the one in his scar. He touched it with 2 fingers. Felt the cold of it, familiar, long present, something he'd grown up with. Something Fawkes had touched on the first night and warned him about. "I know," he said, to Fawkes, who was still on his shoulder and whose warmth was running through him like steady firelight. "I know. We'll get there." Fawkes made the sound that meant yes, obviously. "I have been patient, continue being systematic." Harry almost laughed. He stood up, brushed the ash from his hands, and touched the portkey. The Great Hall of Hogwarts had been set up as a staging area in the 2 hours since Cedric's portkey arrival. Dumbledore had moved fast, faster than Harry had expected, and with the specific efficiency of someone who, whatever his other qualities, was genuinely extraordinary in a crisis. The fake Moody had been exposed and contained. The real Moody had been located in his own trunk, thin and furious and alive. Pettigrew was in Ministry custody under armed guard with 3 Aurors who had been briefed by Dumbledore personally, bypassing Fudge entirely, which Harry noted with quiet satisfaction. The Aurors who had received the briefing were Kingsley Shacklebolt and Nymphadora Tonks, which were good choices. Harry had met both of them through serious acquittal proceedings and had opinions that amounted to competent, honest, willing to think past the official narrative. Good choices. Deliberate choices. Dumbledore learning, in real time, to make different ones. Harry arrived through the portkey into the center of the Great Hall and landed on both feet, and the room went immediately and completely silent. Sirius reached him first. Harry was ready for the hug in the sense that he saw Sirius crossing the hall at speed and made no attempt to be anywhere else. Sirius Black embraced his godson in the Great Hall of Hogwarts with the force of a man who had just watched through a scrying mirror as his 13-year-old faced down Voldemort in a graveyard and would like to make his feelings about this known through physical contact. "I'm fine," Harry said, slightly muffled by Sirius' shoulder. "I watched you pick up the thing." Sirius' voice was rough. "You picked it up, Harry. It couldn't hurt me." "The Phoenix Fire, you are 14, and fine," Harry said, and pulled back, and looked at Sirius with both hands on Sirius' arms in a grip that was steadying in both directions. "I'm fine. Look at me. I'm fine." Sirius looked at him. Gray eyes checking green, checking the scar, checking Harry's hands. He exhaled slowly. "You're going to give me a heart condition." "Probably," Harry agreed. Ron appeared at his left with the specific posture of someone who has been standing at controlled attention for 2 hours waiting to be allowed to have a reaction. "You said it would be fine," he said. It was fine. You said, and I quote, "Don't worry, it's probably just the final task," and what it was a graveyard. In fairness, Harry said, the final task was in the graveyard. That's not the distinction I was making. You're both fine, Hermione said, appearing on Harry's right with a composure that was clearly costing her. Her eyes were slightly red-rimmed and her voice was absolutely steady, which was the most Hermione available combination of those things. Harry, what actually happened? All of it. Now. He told them. He told all of them, Sirius, Ron, Hermione, Lupin, who was standing slightly back with the controlled expression of someone managing a significant reaction, Dumbledore, who was present and listening and not interrupting, which was itself significant. He told it plainly and in sequence and without dramatic emphasis because plain and sequential was how it actually happened and dramatic emphasis would have required him to feel things he was currently deferring. When he finished, the Great Hall was quiet. Pettigrew gave you the Horcrux, Ron said slowly. He released it. I'm not sure he fully knew what it was. But yes. Because you talked to him. Because he had doubt under the fear and I found it and used it. Harry looked at his hands, still faintly warm. He's not a good person. He made choices that got my parents killed and Sirius imprisoned and hurt a lot of other people. But he was capable of one right thing when it was offered clearly enough. He paused. I don't know what that's worth in the accounting. But it was useful. 5 left, Hermione said, and she had clearly been calculating since approximately the second sentence of Harry's account. The locket, that was the Black family locket, we know it's been moved from the cave, it's in number 12 Grimmauld Place, Sirius said, with the expression of a man who has just understood why Harry asked him a very specific question about the family home's inventory 2 months ago. Yes, Harry said. I figured. We'll go on Saturday. We, Sirius said. You, me, Remus if he wants to come. The locket is behind a preservation ward keyed to Black family blood, which means, I'm the last Black, Sirius said. Yes. I'm coming. The cup is in Bellatrix Lestrange's Gringotts vault, Harry continued, which produced a silence of a very specific quality. You cannot break into Gringotts, Hermione said. Not break in. Request access through legal channels under the Proceeds of Dark Magic Recovery provision that the Gringotts Treaty includes. It's never been used. But it exists. He looked at Hermione. I'll need a solicitor. Hermione made a face that was halfway between impressed and exasperated. I'll research it. The diadem is in the room of requirement. The ring is at the Gaunt Shack in Little Hangleton, we were just there, I can locate it precisely. The snake is with Voldemort's shade, which means it's mobile, which means we deal with the others first and then find it. He looked at each of them in turn. The last one is in my scar. Another silence. Different quality from the Gringotts one. This one had weight in it, personal weight, the weight of something that had been known about and not addressed and was now on the table. Dumbledore spoke for the first time. Harry, he said, carefully. The one in your scar, has to come out, Harry said. I know. And I know what the original plan was, or the plan before I ruined it. He looked at Dumbledore directly. You were going to let me figure it out myself. At the right moment. Walking to my death so the soul piece would die too. He said it without anger, without heat, completely factually. That's not happening. Dumbledore's hands were very still on the table in front of him. He did not deny it. I believe, Harry said, that the soul piece can be extracted without killing the host. The phoenix fire in my magical field is already incompatible with it, I can feel the difference between my magic and it every day. The question is whether there's a method to evict it rather than just making the host inhospitable. He turned to Lupin. You're the best practical magic theorist I know. I've been reading everything I can find on soul magic. I need your help with the extraction theory. Lupin looked at him. Made the same recalibration everyone made when Harry Potter outlined a plan, the rapid adjustment of expectation upward. I'll start tonight, he said. Good. Harry looked at the room. Felt the weight of everyone in it, the warmth of Sirius, the bright steadiness of Ron, Hermione's fierce focus, Lupin's careful regard, Dumbledore's complicated silence, Fawkes above them all on a beam above the head table, warm and present and watching. We're going to end this, Harry said. Not as a speech. Not as a rallying cry. Just as a fact, stated plainly in a room full of people who needed to hear a fact. Completely. No more hiding pieces of a soul in objects and hoping for immortality. No more child locked in a cupboard as a power source. No more plans that need someone to die for them to work. A pause. We do this properly and then we're done with it. Simple as that. Sirius said, and his tone was light but his eyes were not. Nothing about it is simple, Harry said. But it's not complicated either. It's just work. He looked at Sirius. Work we do together. Sirius nodded once, the sharp, definitive nod of someone committing fully. Lupin nodded beside him, quieter but equally complete. Ron cracked his knuckles with the specific energy of someone who has been waiting for something concrete to do. Hermione was already pulling out a notebook. Dumbledore was looking at Harry with the expression that Harry had only started seeing in the last year, the one without management in it, without strategy, without the careful warm performance of the man who knows best. Just an old man looking at a young one with something that was honest and complicated and real. Harry, Dumbledore said. Harry looked at him. I owe you an accounting that I cannot fully give because it would take longer than tonight and involve truths I am still, he paused. The pause was genuine, not a tool. Still processing. But what I can tell you, now, is that I was wrong. Not about Voldemort's danger. Not about the necessity of stopping him. About the path. About what I assumed was necessary and what I decided for you without your consent. He looked at Harry with the eyes of a man who has been genuinely, productively changed by something and is old enough to know how rare that is. I was wrong. The great hall was very quiet. Harry looked at him for a moment. He thought about the blocks, about the cupboard years, about every time Dumbledore had held information back and called it protection, about every planned revelation and managed step on the road to the sacrifice Dumbledore had always intended. He also thought about the last year. The complete disclosure. The Horcrux research, finally shared. The legal maneuvering for Sirius trial. The way Dumbledore had started, slowly and genuinely, to treat Harry as a partner in something rather than a piece in it. I know, Harry said. And I think you know I know. But thank you for saying it. He held the old man's gaze for a moment. We can have the longer conversation later. Tonight we need to plan. Dumbledore nodded. Breathed. And then he straightened slightly, and looked at the assembled room, and said, then let's get started, in the voice of someone who has put something down and picked up something else in its place. The next 4 months moved at a pace that would later feel compressed in memory, the way intense periods always do, like they happened faster than the calendar allowed, like the ordinary texture of days was suspended in favor of something more concentrated. The locket went first. Grimmauld Place on a Saturday in November, Sirius blood opening the preservation ward, Harry's fire destroying what was inside it. The soul piece in the locket screamed and showed him visions and Harry held it in his fire and thought you're not real with the specific certainty of someone who has processed exactly this kind of manipulation before, and the locket went dark and the screaming stopped. Sirius stood in the drawing room of his childhood home afterward and looked at the ruined locket on the floor and said, quietly, good. The ring was December. The gaunt shack was cold and abandoned and the ring was under cursed wards that Harry navigated with Dumbledore beside him, the two of them working the cursed structure together with the combined methodology of 60 years of experience and 4 years of increasingly frank collaboration. Dumbledore's hands shook slightly reaching for the ring and Harry watched him and understood without being told that this was not just a Horcrux, this was a Hallow, and there was a history attached to it that predated the Horcrux and complicated the emotional math. Don't put it on, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. Whatever it's showing you. Whatever you're feeling when you look at it. Harry held his gaze. It's not real. It's not worth it. A long pause, in which Dumbledore held the ring in his palm and Harry watched the thing in the man's face that was old and grief-shaped and the specific kind of desperate that only comes from something you've carried for a very long time. Then Dumbledore set it on the floor and Harry destroyed it, and neither of them mentioned what the ring might have offered, and they walked back through the cold December evening without talking about it, and the not talking was itself a kind of honesty. The diadem was January, the room of requirement, which Harry navigated by thinking very clearly about what he needed and finding a door that hadn't been there that morning and walking through it into a room the size of several warehouses, stacked with centuries of abandoned magical objects, with Fawkes flying ahead to lead him to the specific wrongness in the enormous pile. That one was simple and also not simple. The diadem had history in it, real history, Rowena Ravenclaw's own and her daughter's and several centuries of grief, and Harry held it and felt all of that and said, softly, I'm sorry this happened to something she made, before he destroyed it. Hermione, who had been with him for this one, looked at him afterward. You apologize to the objects, she said. To the history in them, Harry said. The Horcrux is the trespass, not the object. She thought about this for a moment. That's quite sophisticated philosophically. I read a lot of ethics, Harry said. You read a lot of everything. Correct. The Gringotts vault was February, 3 weeks of legal preparation, Hermione managing the proceeds of dark magic recovery filing with a thoroughness that made the Gringotts legal team visibly unhappy and also visibly unable to reject the application, which was what thoroughness was for. They went in with a Gringotts official and the law on their side and Sirius because Sirius had been officially reinstated to enough social standing that his presence was stabilizing, and Harry destroyed the cup while the official watched with an expression of complex professional neutrality. The snake, Nagini, was March. That one required finding her first, which required the trace on Voldemort's shade, which Harry could feel through his scar the way you can feel a headache coming, directional, distant, specific. She was in Scotland, in an old manor that had been abandoned, coiled around the chair of a shade that was barely maintaining coherence without the sustaining network of Horcruxes that had been steadily destroyed beneath it. Harry walked into the manor with Fawkes and Sirius and Lupin and felt Voldemort's presence fill the space with the specific cold of something that has been damaged repeatedly and is becoming desperate. You're almost done, Harry said, to the dim shape in the chair. All the Horcruxes but the snake and the scar. And you will not, the thin cold voice said, destroy the last one. Watch me, Harry said, and looked at Nagini. The snake was enormous and ancient and had been Voldemort's companion longer than most of his human followers had been alive. Harry looked at her with the full presence of someone who had spoken to snakes since he was 5 and had been developing that specific magical conversation since he understood what it was. He hissed at her. Not in Parseltongue exactly, more in the way he'd first spoken to the boa constrictor in the zoo, the way that was less language and more intention. He said, in whatever register snakes understand, you have been a person's weapon for too long. You were a creature first. Nagini lifted her great head and looked at him. Don't try to influence my familiar, Voldemort's cold voice said, with something in it that Harry identified as the first genuine crack of something adjacent to fear. Harry kept his eyes on Nagini. She was magnificent and terrible and he felt sorry for her in the specific way he felt things, not performatively, but actually, with the real awareness of what she had been made into. He said to her, I can't give you back what you were. But you don't have to be this anymore. Nagini was still for a long moment. Then she moved, not toward Harry, not toward Voldemort, but away, the long powerful flow of her toward the manor's exterior, through a broken window, into the cold March night. No, Voldemort said. The shape in the chair straightened. The cold in the room intensified. No, she chose, Harry said. That's what happens when you give things a choice. Then he burned the shade. It was not the same as destroying a Horcrux. The shade had no physical anchor left, no container, no body, no object to sustain it. Without Nagini and with all the other Horcruxes gone, Voldemort's consciousness existed in the world on nothing but momentum, the way a fire exists after you've removed the fuel. You don't need to fight fire that has no more to burn. You need to wait for it, and deny it anything new to consume, and let it diminish. Harry's fire was not waiting fire. It was the specific kind that burns what shouldn't be there, not the natural warmth of phoenix fire, which sustains and heals, but the inverse of the cold that dark magic produces, the warmth that dark magic cannot exist in the presence of. The shade dissipated. Not dramatically. Not with the theatrical death of a movie villain. Just, gone. The cold lifted. The room was just a room. The chair was just a chair. Sirius was very still in the doorway. Lupin had his wand down and his face turned slightly away. Fawkes was quiet on Harry's shoulder. Harry stood in the empty room and felt his scar. Still there. Still cold. Still the last piece of a broken soul that had managed to affix itself to a living child and had lived there for 14 years. One left, he said. The soul extraction took 6 weeks, and Lupin's complete theoretical framework and Dumbledore's complete practical knowledge, and 3 false starts and 1 near success that wasn't close enough, and a lot of honestly frightening moments, and finally, a Sunday evening in April in the Hogwarts hospital wing with Madame Pomfrey pretending she wasn't watching from behind the curtain of her office. The method they arrived at was not in any text. It was built from first principles, from Lupin's soul magic theory and Dumbledore's Horcrux knowledge and Harry's own understanding of how the phoenix fire in his magical field interacted with the soul piece, which he had been mapping carefully for 3 years. The logic was this: the soul piece had attached to Harry as an accident, using the killing curse's rebound as an unexpected delivery mechanism, and had embedded in his magical field in the moment of that rebound. It was not, technically, supposed to be there. It had no natural affinity for Harry's magic. The only reason it had stayed was that it had been given no alternative. The alternative was a phoenix. Fawkes, specifically. Fawkes, who had a bond with Harry that was 9 years deep and constitutive, not a wand bond or a familiar bond, but the specific bond that forms between a phoenix and a person when the phoenix has been present for the formation of the person's magical identity. Fawkes was part of the architecture. Which meant Fawkes could reach into that architecture and distinguish between what belonged there and what didn't, and offer the thing that didn't belong somewhere else to go. Not destroy it. Offer it an exit. The soul piece went into the song. That was the closest description Harry or Lupin could manage afterward. Fawkes sang, not the grief song or the anger song or the warmth song, but something that had no category, something that Harry had never heard, and that the 6 phoenixes who were present for it were very still during, with the particular quality of creatures witnessing something that is not common even for them, and the cold in Harry's scar loosened, for the first time in his life, and then it was gone. Not into ash. Not into darkness. Into the song, which was warmth, which was life, which was the specific kind of fire that does not destroy but transforms. The soul piece, which had been a torn fragment of a broken person's worst self, went into phoenix fire, and whatever happened to it there was not Harry's business and not anyone's. It was simply no longer in him. He lay in the hospital bed for a moment with his hand on his forehead where the scar still was. It didn't go away, the scar, the mark was too old for that, but feeling it now was like feeling any old scar. Just a mark. No cold. No presence. No weight. Just skin. He started laughing, which surprised everyone including him. Ron, who had been sitting in the chair beside the bed with the specific posture of someone who has been still for 2 hours by an act of pure will, leaned forward. Well? Ron said. It's gone, Harry said. Ron let out a breath that had clearly been held since approximately April. Right, he said. Right. Good. Then he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and let his face do several things without comment. Hermione's hand found Harry's and held it, and she didn't say anything because she didn't need to. Sirius came around the curtain from where he'd been standing outside it for 2 hours and sat on the bed without asking and put one hand on the back of Harry's neck in the way that was his specific form of physical comfort, solid and warm and present. Done, he said. Done, Harry said. Fawkes sang one note, clean and bright, and the April evening came through the hospital wing's windows with the specific quality of spring arriving after a long winter, that particular light, that smell of thaw, that sense of the world deciding to be warm again. Harry lay in the bed surrounded by everyone who mattered and felt his own magic run through him, all of it, all his own, every channel open and every pathway clear, with nothing in it that wasn't his. It felt like breathing after years of someone's hand on your throat. It felt like beginning. Chapter 6, What the Ashes Remember. The Wizengamot convened on a Thursday in June. Not because Thursday was significant or because June had any particular magical resonance, but because that was the earliest date available after the ministry had spent 6 weeks trying to determine whether the convening was legally required, politically survivable, and logistically manageable, and had arrived at the answer yes, yes, and barely respectively. The chamber was full. Not the ordinary full of routine legislative sessions, where seats stayed empty and the ancient stone walls absorbed the sound of 40 people conducting government business with professional detachment. Full in the way that the chamber hadn't been since Voldemort's first fall, every bench occupied, standing room in the gallery, reporters in the press enclosure who had been fighting over the 4 available spots since 5 in the morning. The air had the quality of a room that has held its breath for a long time and is not yet sure it's safe to exhale. Harry sat in the witness chair, which was, technically, a chair with chains attached, though the chains had not been invoked, and lay coiled at the base of the legs like an apology, and looked at the assembled Wizengamot with the level regard of someone who has been preparing for this conversation for a very long time. He was 15. He was wearing his school robes, which he had chosen deliberately over the formal wizarding where Sirius had suggested, because school robes said I am still a student and this is how far you've managed to get before being called to account, which was a message worth sending. Cornelius Fudge sat in the minister's chair with the expression of a man watching a controlled demolition of his own building from the inside. He had spent 6 weeks trying to prevent this hearing through 5 separate procedural mechanisms and had been denied on all 5 counts. He had argued that the events in question were being handled through appropriate ministry channels. He had argued that a public hearing would cause unrest. He had argued jurisdictional points that his legal team had warned him were not solid and had been right. The Wizengamot chief witch, Amelia Bones, looked at Harry with the specific regard of a woman who has been doing her job with integrity for 30 years and has been waiting for this particular morning. Harry James Potter, she said. You've requested this hearing under Article 7 of the Wizengamot Charter, which provides any magical citizen the right to present evidence of systematic magical interference with their person to the full body of the Wizengamot. Is that correct? Yes, Harry said. You may begin. Harry had thought about how to structure this. He had thought about it for the better part of 2 months, since it became clear that the full accounting of what had been done, not just Voldemort, not just the Horcruxes, but the wider infrastructure of control and manipulation that had surrounded his life, needed to happen in a room with legal teeth, not just in private conversations with people who already knew. He didn't want revenge. He had examined this honestly, in the way he examined all honest questions about himself, and arrived at the conclusion that what he wanted was the truth on the record, the system forced to look at what it had allowed and what it had done, and the specific changes that would follow from that looking. He started with the blocks. He described them technically, clinically, in the language he'd developed over years of studying exactly what had been done to him, the specific type of suppression charm, the maintenance schedule he'd reconstructed from Dumbledore's own records, the impact on magical development, the fact that a child's magic had been deliberately restricted from age 1 to age 5 by an external actor without that child's knowledge or consent or any legal authorization. Who placed these enchantments? Bones asked. Albus Dumbledore, Harry said. The chamber produced a sound that was not quite speech and not quite silence, the collective processing of a body of people encountering a piece of information that reorganizes the room. Dumbledore was in the chamber. He had come willingly, more than willingly, had told Harry 2 weeks ago that he intended to be present and to confirm everything Harry said, which was the most complete version of taking responsibility that Harry had seen from him and which he had acknowledged without either dismissing or over-crediting. The chief witch looked at Dumbledore. Headmaster. Do you confirm this testimony? I do, Dumbledore said, and his voice carried into the chamber with its usual clarity and the unusual quality of a man who is not managing his presentation. The enchantments described are accurate. I placed them. I maintained them on a monthly basis from the time Harry was placed with his relatives until the night of July 31, 1991, when they were removed by an external force. He paused. My reasons were, in my assessment at the time, sound. I am here to tell you that my assessment was wrong. The chamber absorbed this. Fudge opened his mouth. Closed it. The political calculation was visible on his face. The desire to throw Dumbledore under the ministry carriages was bumping up against the awareness that Dumbledore's cooperative testimony was part of what made this hearing coherent, and that undermining Dumbledore's credibility now would undermine the hearing's coherence, which would undermine the very thing Fudge needed in order to look like he was on the right side of it. Fudge closed his mouth and said nothing, which was one of the most significant things he did all morning. Harry continued. He described the placement at Privet Drive, not as a matter of cruelty, because it hadn't been cruelty in intent, but as a matter of custody decisions made without legal process, without consideration of the child's interests, without oversight of any kind. He described the ward on Privet Drive, the blood magic that kept him physically tied to the location, the systematic deprivation of information about his own life and history. He described the prophecy. The chamber went very quiet when he read it aloud. The prophecy, Harry said, was obtained by Voldemort's follower Severus Snape, who at that time served as a Death Eater spy and who delivered it to Voldemort, which is the direct chain of causation for Voldemort's decision to target my family. The person who obtained the prophecy is now a Hogwarts professor. He looked at the chamber steadily. I am not calling for his dismissal or prosecution. I'm noting the fact for the record because the record should be complete. Several heads turned toward where Snape was seated in the gallery. He had come because Harry had told him he would be mentioned, and Snape had responded to this information in the way he responded to most things Harry said, which was with visible irritation and quiet compliance. His expression in the gallery right now was the expression of someone sitting in fire by choice and refusing to let it show. Harry looked at him briefly and looked away. The prophecy also contained an implication, Harry continued, that was interpreted by Professor Dumbledore as requiring my death. Specifically, the prophecy states that neither Voldemort nor I can live while the other survives. This was interpreted as meaning I would need to die at the appropriate moment in order to allow Voldemort to be killed. He paused. This interpretation informed every decision Professor Dumbledore made about my upbringing, my education, and my preparation for the last 14 years. The chamber's silence had a different quality now. Denser. The interpretation was not shared with me, Harry said. The plan was not discussed with me. The fact that I was being, not educated, but shaped toward a specific end that involved my death, was not disclosed. He looked at Dumbledore. Not with anger, because the anger had been processed through 14 months of honest conversation and was now somewhere more complex. Just with clarity. Is that an accurate summary, Professor? It is, Dumbledore said. His voice was steady. With the additional note that I believe I was wrong about the interpretation itself. The prophecy's language does not require Harry's death. It requires only that the connection between them be fully severed, which has been accomplished through the destruction of the soul piece in Harry's scar. He looked at the chamber. Harry accomplished this without dying. Which I will acknowledge I did not believe was possible, and which I was wrong not to pursue more vigorously. Chief Witch-Bones looked at the chamber. Looked at Harry. Mr. Potter. What are you asking this body to do? Several things, Harry said. First, I want the full case file on every decision made about my custody and magical development placed in the public record. Not sealed. Not classified. Publicly accessible. He looked at Fudge. Every ministry official who was aware of the blocks and the ward structure should be named in that file. The chain of knowledge should be documented. Fudge had gone the color of old chalk. Second, I want a formal review of the prophecy protocol, which currently allows the unspeakables to hold prophetic records without subject notification. the person a prophecy concerns has the right to know about it. That should be law, not custom. Third, I want the remuneration provisions for magical servitude reviewed. He let that land, then clarified before anyone could argue the framing. The ward on Privet Drive that bound me to that location for 10 years constitutes magical compulsion. The legal framework for assessing and compensating that compulsion exists, it's in the Charter, Section 42, applied to house elves and never extended to humans. A pause. I'm not interested in compensation personally. I'm interested in the law being applied consistently. Several Wisengamot members were writing rapidly. Several were not writing at all and staring at Harry with expressions that covered a range from grim agreement to the specific discomfort of people who benefit from a system being asked to examine it. Fourth, Harry said, and this was the one he'd considered longest, I want this chamber to formally recognize that the chosen one narrative, the specific framing of my life as destined and necessary and oriented towards sacrifice, has been used to justify actions that would not otherwise be legally or ethically permissible. He looked at the chamber without heat, without performance. I am not a chosen anything. I am a person who had significant magical ability, a specific connection to a dark wizard, and the good fortune of having help from people I trust. The mythologizing of that into destiny and sacrifice and the greater good is what allowed adults to make decisions about my life that were not theirs to make. A pause. That stops today. The chamber was very still. Amelia Bones looked at him for a long moment. She was a woman who had seen a great deal and had developed the specific economy of expression that comes from decades of witnessing and deciding. She looked at Harry Potter, 15 years old, in school robes, in a chair with unenforced chains at its base, and then she looked at the assembled chamber. We will recess for 30 minutes, she said. And then this body will vote on the 4 provisions presented. They voted on all 4. The first 2 passed with the chamber majority before the 30 minutes was up. The third passed narrowly, Section 42 would be extended, the review would proceed, which was a beginning even if it was not yet an end. The fourth required 2 rounds of voting and a clarifying amendment that narrowed its scope to the specific legal applications rather than a broad philosophical statement, which Harry accepted because Hermione, sitting in the gallery and watching his face, had anticipated this and briefed him on the acceptable amendment range 3 days ago. 4 for 4. Fudge left the chamber after the final vote with the careful dignity of a man who is managing his exit velocity while the building comes down around him. His resignation was submitted 8 days later, citing health reasons that no one believed, and the press spent 3 entertaining weeks examining the architecture of his departure in loving detail. Harry walked out of the Wisengamot chamber into the ministry atrium and felt the stone and bureaucratic magic of the building around him and thought, that's one more wall down. Sirius was waiting in the atrium. He'd watched from the gallery with Lupin beside him, both of them not doing very much of what they'd claimed they were going to do with their faces. 4 provisions, Sirius said, when Harry reached him. 4 out of 4, Harry said. Sirius put his arm around Harry's shoulders and they walked toward the flue bank with the ease of 2 people who have learned how to be family in the specific way that is chosen rather than assigned and is therefore sturdier than either kind of blood obligation. Your father, Sirius said, would have given a standing ovation. Lily would have listed 17 ways you could have argued it more efficiently and then given a standing ovation. Hermione already gave me the 17 ways, Harry said. Of course she did. She was right about most of them. Of course she was. They reached the flue bank and Sirius picked up a fistful of powder. Lunch at Grimmauld Place. Remus is cooking, which means it will be extremely good and he will not accept any thanks for it. I know his system, Harry said. I know you know his system. I'm narrating because I'm processing. A pause, and Sirius' voice changed slightly, the lightness shifting into something more honest. You were extraordinary in there. I was thorough, Harry said. There's a difference. There's not, actually. Sirius looked at him sideways. In your specific case, there really isn't. Harry stepped into the flue and said Grimmauld Place and the green fire took him, and on the other side of it was the kitchen of number 12, which smelled like whatever Lupin was making and sounded like Ron arguing with a portrait in the hallway, and Hermione's voice carrying from the sitting room where she was already writing a summary of the day's proceedings for a comprehensive analysis she was compiling whether anyone had asked for it or not. Home. The word for it was home, and it was chosen and specific and warm. 3 days after the hearing, Fawkes led Harry to the edge of the forbidden forest at dawn. Not metaphorically. Literally, landed on his windowsill at 5 in the morning and made the sound that Harry had learned meant come now, specifically, and Harry dressed and followed him out of the castle and across the grounds in the early grey light, the dew cold on the grass, the forest dark at its edge and not threatening, just present. The other phoenixes were there. Not the 18 from the first night, those had come and gone and returned in different configurations over the years, the network's traffic through Harry's life. But a gathering, 11 of them, on the ground and in the low branches of the forest's edge, the old copper and gold one from Ireland who had been there from the beginning and others whose origins Harry could feel in the specific quality of their fire. The Australian coast. The high Himalayas. The Saharan ridge. They had come a long way to be here this morning. Harry stood in the grey dawn light and felt them all simultaneously in the way the network allowed, each one distinct and warm and present. He had been connected to this, to all of them, since that first night, but had not had a moment to simply be present with that connection without something else requiring his attention. This morning required nothing. He sat down on the cold ground in his school robes with the dew immediately soaking through, and the old copper and gold bird walked forward with the dignified deliberateness of something that has been alive for a very long time and knows exactly what it is doing, and settled beside him. Harry put his hand on its neck, below the jaw, the same way he'd touched Fawkes that first night at age 5 in the rain. What came was not the grief broadcast from 9 years ago. Not the anger recognition of the night the blocks fell. Something different, something that arrived in Harry's chest the way warmth arrives, gradually and completely, without announcement. The network in its entirety, every phoenix currently alive, their collective presence, the ancient and living web of empathy and fire that had felt one child's pain across the world and decided, without calculation or self-interest, that it was intolerable. Harry sat with it for a while and let himself feel the full weight of what it meant, that he had not been alone in that cupboard even when he thought he was, that the pain he had experienced in those 5 years had not gone unheard, that somewhere in the world something ancient and warm had felt it and cared. Not because of prophecy. Not because he was chosen. Because he was alive and suffering, and that was, to these creatures, simply enough. He thought about the night it happened. The 5-year-old in the cramped dark with a broken light bulb, feeling something crack inside him, not knowing what it was. Watching fire in the rain. Touching Fawkes for the first time. He thought about every wall that had come down since then. The blocks. Dumbledore's plan. The legal architecture of his own exploitation. The Horcruxes. The soul piece in his scar. All of it dismantled piece by piece, not through destiny or sacrifice but through sustained attention, good information, and the specific help of people who had decided to show up. He looked at the sky. The sun was coming, the horizon above the forest going from grey to rose to the beginning of gold, the specific quality of early light that arrives when the dark has held long enough and the world remembers it can be warm. Fawkes sang. One note first, the way every song begins. Then the others, the copper bird beside Harry, the others in the branches, the presences across the network joining in a lag of seconds, distance translated into harmony, the web of fire singing from multiple directions and arriving at the forest's edge as something that was not music in any formal sense but was what music is reaching for. Harry sat in it and felt it run through him the way his own magic did, completely, naturally, as though it belonged there, as though he belonged there, in this specific moment at the edge of this specific forest as the sun came up over Hogwarts on an ordinary June morning with nothing required of him and nowhere else to be. He was 15. His scar was just a scar. His magic was his own. His life was, for the first time in his memory, pointed at something of his own choosing rather than being aimed by someone else at a target he hadn't picked. He sat with that for a while and found it very good. The summer that followed was the best of his life by a considerable margin. Not because nothing happened, things happened, the world being what it is. The ministry reorganized messily under acting Minister Bones, who was honest and competent and utterly unwilling to pretend things were simpler than they were, which made her effective and unpopular in roughly equal measure. The Daily Prophet ran 18 consecutive front pages on the Wisingamot hearings' aftermath before running out of new angles and switching to speculation, which was more comfortable territory for them. Dumbledore gave an interview that was 3 columns long and contained more genuine personal disclosure than anything he'd said in public in 40 years, and the letters to the editor response filled the Prophet for a week. Harry read all of it and thought about it and had opinions and didn't feel compelled to share most of them publicly, because privacy was something he had claimed along with everything else at the hearing and he intended to use it. Grimmauld Place in July was Sirius cooking badly, Lupin cooking well, and both of them arguing about what music to put on while they did it. It was Ron arriving on the second week with a broom under one arm and the energy of someone released from a confined space, and Hermione on the third with a stack of books she claimed were purely recreational and which were annotated from the first page. It was evenings in the garden that stayed warm until 10, and the particular idle laughter of people who like each other with no agenda attached. It was Harry lying in the grass one afternoon in August with Fawkes beside him and the warm weight of 11 years of fire in his bones and thinking, without urgency, about what he wanted. Not what was expected. Not what prophecy had pointed at or Dumbledore had planned or the Wisingamot had voted on or the Daily Prophet had decided his role in history was. What he wanted, as a 15-year-old person who had just finished a comprehensive restructuring of the circumstances of his own life and was, for the first time, genuinely free to consider the question. He wanted to finish school. He wanted to understand magic more deeply, not just the curriculum, not just the useful and applicable, but the genuine theoretical structure of it, the old knowledge, the things that lived at the edges of the documented record. He wanted to learn Parseltongue properly, which he had been treating as an accident of the soul-piece connection but which persisted after the extraction, meaning it was his own ability, his own dimension, and worth understanding. He wanted to flew to Ron's house on weekends for no particular reason. He wanted to watch Hermione figure things out, which was genuinely one of his favorite experiences, the specific progression of her face from question to analysis to conclusion, like watching someone light up from the inside. He wanted to fly when there was no game attached, just air and height and the particular freedom of moving fast in 3 dimensions. He wanted Sirius to be okay. Not performing fine, not managing, but actually okay, in the way that takes time after Azkaban and can't be rushed and requires people around you who are willing to wait for it without making the waiting a pressure. He watched Sirius through the summer and saw it happening incrementally, the way he laughed more fully by August than he had in June, the way he started occupying the house rather than just existing in it, the way the shadows under his eyes were less absolute. He wanted Lupin to stop apologizing for his condition to everyone except the people who actively required his condition to be a problem, which was basically no one in this house. He told him this directly in mid-July, on the back steps with tea cooling between them, and Lupin had looked at him and said, "You're quite relentless about honesty, aren't you?" And Harry said, "It saves time," and Lupin had laughed and said, "Your mother used to say that too, in different words," and Harry said, "Tell me," and Lupin did. He wanted to write to Dumbledore. This surprised him slightly, not that he wanted to, but the quality of why. It wasn't the fraught, careful, information-extracting correspondence of his childhood, each letter a negotiation. It was more like, correspondence. The actual kind. Where both parties say what they think and sometimes disagree and occasionally find out the other person is right. Dumbledore had written him a letter in July that was 4 pages long and contained approximately no strategy and a great deal of actual thought about magic and history and the specific question of whether power serves those who hold it or those in its vicinity. Harry had replied with 3 pages and the argument had run for 6 letters before they landed on a position neither of them had held at the start, which was the best kind of argument. He was not forgiving Dumbledore in the simple sense, where the slate is wiped and the history disappears. That was not forgiveness, that was erasure, and Harry had enough respect for what had actually happened to refuse erasure. But he was building something with the man that was honest and was growing from an honest foundation, and that was worth something real. The scar caught sunlight like any other scar. Just keratin and old repair work, a seam in the skin where something had happened once. He touched it sometimes, not obsessively, just checking the same way you check a healed wound occasionally. The confirmation of its ordinariness was its own small pleasure. No cold. No presence. Just skin. He was himself, entirely, all the way through. September 1st came the way September 1st always did, with platform noise and owl complaints and the smell of the Hogwarts Express, which was coal smoke and old wood and something inexplicably, comfortingly itself. Harry pushed his trolley through the barrier and felt the familiar shift of the wizarding platform, the gathered magic of families and students and the locomotive's ancient enchantments, and paused for a moment just past the barrier to take the read of it. He looked different than he had at 11. He was taller, the lean build of his childhood having consolidated into something that was clearly going to be his father's build eventually, though he wasn't there yet. Fawkes was on his shoulder rather than the trolley, which was a choice Fawkes had made in third year and maintained consistently, apparently finding the trolley arrangement undignified. The platform noticed him. It always did, partly the scar and partly the phoenix and partly, increasingly, the specific quality of his presence, the way he moved through a space with complete awareness of it, the warmth that ambient magical observers could feel from a few feet away. He didn't perform awareness of any of this. He was just present. Ron appeared at his elbow with the quality of someone who has been watching for him for 10 minutes and is going to manage the resulting energy through motion. Finally. Hermione's been here for 40 minutes. She reorganized the standard compartment configuration. Did she improve it? Yes. Annoyingly. Hermione appeared on his other side with a book already in one hand and the expression of someone who reorganized the compartment for practical reasons and resents being described as though this required any special explanation. There's a new defense professor, she said. The rumor from the prefects is someone from the Auror office. I heard it was a researcher, Ron said. Both can be true, Harry said. How are both, someone who was an Auror and is now researching? Or the other way? Harry started moving toward the train. We'll find out tonight. They found a compartment, the one Hermione had reorganized, which was objectively better than the standard arrangement, and settled in, and Neville arrived shortly after, broad-shouldered and easy in himself in the way he'd become over 4 years of being allowed to be himself without the weight of a grandmother's disappointed expectations pressing down on him. Ginny Weasley stuck her head in the door and was immediately invited in by Ron, who managed this with the casual ease of someone who has always known his youngest sibling deserved to be wherever she wanted to be. Harry watched them all settle, the comfort of it, the specific texture of this group of people in this compartment on this train, and felt the warmth of it run through him alongside his own warmth, layered and distinct and completely good. 5th year, Ron said, putting his feet up. Defense OWL Hermione already has a revision schedule. It's not ready yet, Hermione said, which was not a denial. We have literally 10 months, 9 months and 3 weeks, Hermione said, which sounds like more than it is when you account for the revision schedule, Harry said to Neville, who was looking between them with the expression of a spectator who has seen this match before and is enjoying it, will be excellent. We'll all use it and none of us will tell her that. I can hear you, Hermione said. I know, Harry said. She looked at him. Pressed her lips together to contain something that was trying to be a smile. It's a very good schedule, she said. I know, Harry said. The train moved. England fell away outside the windows, London first, then its outskirts, then the long green of countryside that Harry had watched from this train 4 times now and would watch again, year after year, the same transition from city to wild that marked the specific boundary between ordinary life and the other kind. Fawkes was warm on his shoulder. The compartment was warm with the specific warmth of people you have chosen. Outside the window the afternoon was long and golden and moving. Harry looked at the countryside and thought about 5 years old in a cupboard in the dark, and the crack that had opened in him that first night, and the fire that had come. He thought about the network, all those phoenixes across the world, feeling a child's pain, deciding it mattered. He thought about Fawkes on a garden wall in the rain, looking at a boy who had never been looked at like that before, like he was recognized, like he was real, like his existence was not a complication but a fact worth caring about. He had spent 9 years dismantling walls. The blocks first, then the narrative, then the plan, then the soul piece, then the legal architecture of his own exploitation. Each wall down and more light, more room, more of himself available to be himself. He was not done. You are never done. That was the thing no one told you. The walls you build yourself are the ones you work on longest, but he was free in the specific sense that mattered most, free to make the walls his own. He was 15 and he had his whole life and he was pointing it at something of his choosing. It looked like this: a train and a window and 5 friends and a phoenix and the evening coming in gold over England, and nothing required of him but to be present for it. What are you thinking about? Hermione asked, without looking up from her book. Harry looked at the window. Nothing in particular. She looked up. Everything, he said. In a good way. She held his gaze for a moment with the specific expression she had when she was running rapid assessment and arriving at satisfaction. Then she went back to her book. Ron had fallen asleep with his feet still up. Neville was talking quietly to Ginny about something herbological. The train rocked gently through the late afternoon. Fawkes made the sound he made when everything was as it should be, not triumphant, not announcing, just warm. Just present. Just fire settled into its best configuration, in the company of what it had chosen. Harry watched the window and let the world move past him and breathed, steadily, completely, with nothing in him that wasn't his own. In every corner of the world where a phoenix lived and flew and remembered, the network was quiet. Not the quiet of something absent, but the quiet of something at rest, the warmth of a fire that has done what it was for and is now simply burning because that is what it does, because that is what it is, because fire does not need a reason beyond its own nature to burn. They had felt a child. They had come. They had burned what needed burning and kept warm what needed warming and stood on a roof in the Surrey rain and sung the sun up over a street that had been too cold for too long. What they had burned was not a man or a plan or a war. They had burned the idea that a person can be owned, by destiny, by the greater good, by someone else's story about who they are and what they're for. They had burned the idea that power is something you manage from the outside, cork and redirect and suppress for safekeeping. They had burned the idea that suffering in the dark, unheard, is the price of being born significant. They had burned, with the particular thorough certainty of things that cannot be bargained with once their minds are made, the presumption that anyone had the right to decide the shape of a life that was not theirs. And in the ash of all that, in the warm grey residue of every block and plan and manipulation that had been held in place by certainty and good intentions and the oldest, most dangerous lie, which is that someone else always knows better, something had grown. Just a person. A 15-year-old on a train with his friends and his phoenix and his whole life in front of him and not a single wall between himself and the horizon that he hadn't built there himself. The network warmed, across oceans and mountains and the enormous indifferent dark of the world, with the particular satisfaction of fire that has been true to its nature and needs nothing more than that. Fawkes sang. The ashes remembered. And the boy who had been freed before he knew he was caged looked at the gold evening outside the window of a moving train and decided, with the quiet certainty of someone coming home to themselves after a very long way, that whatever came next, whatever walls, whatever fights, whatever enormous difficult beautiful life was waiting on the other side of the horizon, he would meet it as himself. Entirely. Unapologetically. Enough.